It was a beautiful, serene day. My sweet daughter held my hand, looking up at me with a bright smile. My loving husband stood beside me, and I felt a deep sense of contentment. But that blissful moment was interrupted when I saw him. "Hey, long time no see," he sneered. It had been years since I'd seen Ian, my ex-husband. He approached us with a smirk that I knew all too well. "Did you have a baby? At your age? An old woman like you." "If I were your age, I wouldn't even think about becoming a mother." "That's none of your business. Leave us alone," I said firmly, trying to walk away. But Ian blocked my path, his eyes raking over me in a way that made my skin crawl. Then, as if he couldn't hold it in any longer, he burst into cruel laughter. "You're old, you know that? How disgusting. And you," he said, turning to my husband, "you're her new husband. You must be out of your mind if you don't know what's good for you. I can't believe you married this old hack." His insults seemed endless. My patience wore thin, and I felt my fists clench in anger. But before I could react, my husband, Wesley, who had been standing calmly beside me, spoke up. "Ian, right?" Wesley said, his voice steady. "Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. You've given us a lot to consider, and you're absolutely entitled to your opinion. I am Quinn. I met and married Ian while working at a company where he was a section manager, my subordinate. After we got married, I was eager to start a family, but at 34, I struggled to conceive, so I turned to infertility treatments. It was a long, challenging journey, but at 38, I finally became pregnant. The joy of knowing I would become a mother was overwhelming. It was my first pregnancy, and I was aware of the risks at my age. Still, I juggled work and preparing for the arrival of our child with determination and hope. I had countless worries, but the joy and happiness of finally carrying the child I had long dreamed of outweighed them all. I was filled with anticipation, believing I would create a happy family with my child and Ian. But Ian wasn't as sure. Fertility treatments were expensive, and I spent most of my pre-marriage savings on them. The side effects often left me physically unwell, making it difficult to maintain the same workload I had before marriage. So I decided to change jobs. The job change meant my salary was cut in half, but it allowed me to work less and focus more on the fertility treatments with a clear mind. However, Ian grew distant. The truth was, Ian had been attracted to me because I was ambitious and earning well before we got married. There was no sign of marriage in my future at the time, and I was on the path to success at work. He noticed my financial stability, which was his main reason for marrying me. When I told him I wanted to have a baby and subsequently changed jobs to focus on the treatment, Ian was unforgiving. He couldn't accept the shift in our circumstances and the cost of the fertility treatments. Eventually, he handed me divorce papers and left. I was stunned at how quickly our marriage fell apart, but I knew I had to be strong for the child I was carrying. I had to raise her well, even on my own. I explained my situation to my company and worked tirelessly. With the support of my parents, I managed to give birth to my child. When I finally held my baby girl in my arms, I felt like the happiest person in the world. Tears of joy streamed down my face, but the only one happier than me was my new husband, Wesley. I had met Wesley as a business partner at my former company. We had a good professional relationship, and he was genuinely disappointed when I resigned. A while later, we crossed paths again at my current company, where we once again became business partners. Wesley knew about my struggles and was always kind and concerned about me. We had always thought well of each other, and it wasn't long before our connection deepened into something more personal. Before my daughter's birth, I remarried Wesley, and the next few years were filled with happiness. Wesley adored my daughter, Ruby, even though she wasn't his biological child. His care for her was almost overprotective. After I gave birth and fell ill, Wesley insisted that I take it easy. He took on most of the housework and cared for Ruby with a tenderness that showed just how much he cared for both of us. One day, we decided to take a walk in the nearby park. The weather was perfect, and Ruby fell asleep soon after we arrived. As we strolled through the park, I noticed a familiar figure walking ahead. My heart sank. I quickly took Wesley's arm, trying to steer us in the opposite direction, but it was too late. The person had already noticed us and was approaching with a smirk and a nasty smile. "Long time no see," he said. I recognized the voice immediately. "Ian, long time." "Did you have a baby?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Yeah. Got a problem with that?" No, I'm just wondering how an old woman like you could be a mother. That's none of your business. Leave us alone, I replied, trying to remain calm. But Ian blocked my way, his gaze sweeping over me with a look of contempt. Then, as if unable to hold back, he burst into cruel laughter. You're too old to be a mother. It's disgusting. His words seemed endless, and when he glanced into the stroller, his sneer deepened. Your kid, she's ugly just like you. Don't you dare say another word, I warned, my voice trembling with anger. I could tolerate insults directed at me, but when someone mocked my child, it was too much to bear. Ian narrowed his eyes in amusement as I took a step forward. Before I could say anything, he quickly shifted his gaze to the side, locking eyes with Wesley, who stood right beside me. I can't believe anyone would marry this old hag, Ian sneered, and she's got a kid with someone else too. Really, stop it, I snapped. It's got nothing to do with you. Ian ignored me, his smirk growing as he continued. Well, Gwen, you made a lot of money. That's all you were ever worth. Without that, there's no reason anyone would want to be with you. My ex-husband then turned his attention fully to Wesley, inching closer with a devilish grin. In this world, everything is about profit and lust, brother. Only fools who don't understand that end up like Quinn here, quitting her job to have a child. Those who don't get the game of profit and loss are destined to fail. You'd better watch out too, Mr. New Husband. Maybe you're the kind of person who doesn't understand profit and loss either, marrying someone like Quinn. Ian's loud, mocking laughter echoed through the peaceful park. His words, spoken in front of me, my child, and Wesley, were unbearable. I clenched my fists, unable to tolerate it any longer, and was about to confront him when Wesley, who had been silently observing the situation, gently restrained me. Quinn, wait. Calm down, Wesley said softly. Wesley, I can't stay silent after being told something like that. I protested. I understand how you feel, he replied, his voice calm and steady, but violence isn't the answer. Wesley smiled at me reassuringly, and I slowly lowered my fist. Quinn, he asked gently, do you know this gentleman? He used to be one of my subordinates at the company I worked for. I replied, deliberately leaving out the fact that Ian was my ex-husband. I didn't want to admit that I had once been married to such a horrible person, but Wesley already seemed to understand. He smiled knowingly and nodded in understanding. So it was you, Wesley said calmly, then turned to me. Quinn, take care of Ruby for me, okay? He handed me the stroller and stepped forward, positioning himself between us and Ian. Wesley looked directly at Ian, his usual soft smile never wavering. Ian, right? Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. You're absolutely right. Profit and loss are very important, not just financially, but also when it comes to the people in our lives. Sometimes it's wise to think in those terms. What you said is reasonable and important. Ian, misinterpreting Wesley's words, grinned even wider. Well, you're not as stupid as I thought you were. Then you shouldn't be with Quinn, you know better. He shot me a smug glance, then put his hand on Wesley's shoulder, assuming he had found an ally. But Wesley brushed Ian's hand away, continuing calmly. You know my father owns a business, and in business, calculating profit and loss is crucial. That's why I'll definitely share what you said today with him. Ian, still not grasping the situation, asked with a hint of curiosity, Is your father present? If you want, I can talk to him directly, Ian offered, his eyes lighting up with the prospect of a potential opportunity. It was obvious he still craved money and status, despite the way he had just mocked me. I was beyond amazed at how quickly he could shift his demeanor when he saw a chance to gain something. I know you're probably busy, Ian, so I'll let my father know. I'm sure he'll be in touch with you soon, Wesley replied smoothly. Well then, I'll leave you alone for today, Ian said, clearly satisfied with himself. With that, Wesley gently took Ruby and me by the hand and led us away. As we walked past Ian, he glanced down at me with a look that almost resembled pity. I couldn't help but feel a small pang of it for him as well, knowing that Wesley's offer wasn't what Ian imagined. Ian's naivety in taking it at face value was almost admirable. What Ian didn't realize was that Wesley's father was the president of a company that held significant sway over the firm Ian worked for. Wesley, although not working in his father's company at the moment, was gaining experience in the business world on his own. This was likely why Ian had no idea who Wesley really was. I had only learned about Wesley's background just before we got married, and his parents had been nothing but kind to me. When they found out I was pregnant with my ex-husband's child, they didn't reject me. Instead, they supported me through the challenges of raising Ruby, and Ruby quickly grew attached to them. It was heartwarming to see them play together, forming a bond that only deepened over time. If my father-in-law had heard what Ian said today, I knew there would be serious consequences. And as expected, the very next day, Ian went to work, only to be summoned by his furious boss. The president of the company, who happened to be my father-in-law, had personally complained to Ian's boss, calling him out by name. My father-in-law, well aware of the circumstances surrounding our divorce, was outraged. He wasted no time in making a phone call to Ian's superior, emphasizing Ian's poor attitude and the importance of properly educating employees. Ian had no idea what was coming, and it was clear he had underestimated the situation entirely. My son told me that one of your employees lectured him about the importance of profit and loss. You should carefully consider how much profit or loss you might incur from one person's mistake, my father-in-law had said to Ian's boss. When Ian's boss confronted him, Ian finally realized the gravity of the situation and decided to call me. "Hello, Quinn. I'm sorry," came Ian's voice over the phone. I was taken aback by the unexpected apology. I knew he might reach out eventually, but I hadn't expected it to happen so soon. The urgency in his voice was clear as he continued to apologize repeatedly. "I'm really sorry. Please forgive me," he pleaded. "Forgive you?" I thought to myself. "After you mocked us like that? What's wrong?" I asked, a hint of sarcasm in my tone. "Did you hear from my father-in-law?" I could hear him choke on the other end, clearly unsettled. "Yes, he gave me your kind advice. I'm really sorry." "I apologize," Ian stammered. "I'd like to apologize to your current husband and the president in person." "Did your boss tell you to do this?" I asked, seeing right through his sudden remorse. "Yes," he admitted, sounding desperate. "I was told not to return to the company until I apologize in person and get your forgiveness. Please help me. We were married once." His voice trailed off, filled with desperation. "Please, Quinn." "Quit it." I cut him off, my voice firm. "You've only ever seen me as someone who earns good money, haven't you? Now you're getting carried away, trying to crawl back when things go wrong. You were the one who said it's all about profit and loss, right? Well, for me, it's a loss to keep you anywhere near my husband and father-in-law. Talking to someone who made fun of my daughter and my husband, it's nothing but a waste of time for me." I paused, letting the words sink in. "So, if you understand, don't call me again." No, Ian's voice grew more desperate. But I hung up before he could finish. He had said countless horrible things to me over the years, and while I might not have said everything I wanted to, at least now, I felt a small sense of satisfaction. I could only imagine the panic Ian must be feeling at this moment. Not long after, rumors about Ian's behavior began to spread throughout the industry. He had always had a tendency to look down on others, and his reputation had never been good. When we worked together, I often found myself cleaning up his messes. But after I left, there was no one to cover for him anymore, and frustrations with Ian began to build both within his company and outside it. Then this incident happened. Ian's boss was furious with him. My father-in-law's company was one of their biggest clients. In the end, Ian couldn't stay at the company and ended up quitting. Now he was struggling to find a new job. One day, I received a long email from Ian, begging me to help him find work. In one part of the email, he even wrote, "I know I said some terrible things, but I really love you, Quinn." How disgusting. I had heard rumors that after our divorce, Ian had started dating a much younger woman. But now, with no job and no prospects, he seemed lost, unable to find his way back to the life he once had. So she left him. It's true what they say, you get what you deserve. Ian kept sending me emails, insisting, "I want you to help me because it's your fault I'm in this pitiful situation," or claiming, "You should help me because I still love you." It's the very definition of karmic retribution. I've been ignoring all the emails, but lately the frequency has been increasing. I'm seriously considering blocking him altogether. Meanwhile, I'm still living a happy life with my loving husband Wesley and our daughter Ruby. Recently, Ruby has started talking, and I can't take my eyes off her. She's growing up so fast, and Wesley, my in-laws, and I are all so in love with her. I want to keep this family happy forever.
I found my father-in-law's body on a Tuesday afternoon. The house was eerily quiet as I stepped inside, my arms laden with groceries. "Frank?" I called out, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. "I picked up your favorite cookies." No answer. Unease crept up my spine as I made my way to the living room. That's when I saw him, slumped in his favorite armchair, remote control still clutched in his lifeless hand. "Oh, God," I whispered, rushing to his side. "Frank! Frank! Can you hear me?" His skin was cold to the touch. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. 911, what's your emergency? My father-in-law, I gasped. I think he's dead. The next few hours passed in a blur. Paramedics, police officers, and finally, my husband Ethan arrived. I watched as he stood in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and something else, something I couldn't quite place. "Sarah," he said, his voice oddly flat. "What happened?" I shook my head, fighting back tears. "I don't know. I just found him like this when I came to drop off groceries." Ethan nodded, his eyes never leaving his father's body as it was zipped into a black bag. "Did you know?" he asked suddenly. "Know what?" He turned to me, his gaze hard. "About the gambling." I blinked, caught off guard. "Gambling? What are you talking about?" Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "Of course you didn't. He was always so good at hiding it." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. "I found this in his desk drawer last week. Look." I took the paper, my eyes widening as I scanned its contents. It was a loan agreement for an astronomical sum, signed by Frank just days ago. "Oh, Ethan," I breathed. "I had no idea." He snatched the paper back, his jaw clenched. Neither did I, not until it was too late. As the last of the officials left, Ethan and I sat in stunned silence on the couch. The weight of Frank's secret hung heavy between us. "What are we going to tell your mother?" I asked softly. Ethan's laugh was hollow. "The truth, I suppose, that her beloved husband was a lying, cheating gambler who left us with nothing but debt." I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "Ethan, please. He was still your father." "Was he?" Ethan stood abruptly, pacing the room. "A father doesn't do this to his family, Sarah. He doesn't lie and steal and—" His voice broke, and I saw a flash of the pain he was trying so hard to hide. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, standing to embrace him. But Ethan stepped back, his eyes cold. "Don't be. He got what he deserved." I stared at my husband, shocked by the venom in his voice. This wasn't the Ethan I knew, the kind and gentle man I'd married. In that moment, I felt a chill of fear. "We should call your mother," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She'll want to know." Ethan nodded, pulling out his phone. As he dialed, I retreated to the kitchen, needing a moment to collect myself. I leaned against the counter, my mind reeling. How had I not known about Frank's gambling? And more importantly, what would this mean for our family? I thought of Marie, Ethan's doting mother, and how devastated she would be. From the living room, I heard Ethan's voice, unnaturally calm as he delivered the news. "Mom, it's Dad. He's gone." I closed my eyes, feeling the world shift beneath my feet. Nothing would ever be the same after today. As I listened to Ethan's one-sided conversation, a nagging thought wormed its way into my mind. If Frank had kept such a massive secret from all of us, what else didn't we know? The days following Frank's funeral were a blur of hushed conversations and tense silences. I watched Ethan like a hawk, searching for any sign of the man I married beneath this cold, angry stranger who had taken his place. One evening, as I was clearing the dinner dishes, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face hardening. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Fine," he snapped, shoving the phone in his pocket. "I'm going out." "Out, Ethan, it's nearly 9. The slam of the front door cut me off. I sank into a chair, my heart racing. This wasn't like him at all. Daisy, sensing my distress, jumped onto my lap. I buried my face in her soft fur, fighting back tears. "What's happening to us, girl?" Hours ticked by. I tried calling Ethan, but it went straight to voicemail. By midnight, worry had given way to anger. I was about to call the police when I heard the front door open. Ethan stumbled in, reeking of alcohol and something else. Smoke? No, not quite. "Where have you been?" I demanded, rising to meet him. He waved me off, nearly losing his balance. "Out, told you." "You're drunk," I said, disbelief coloring my voice. Ethan rarely drank, and never to excess. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made me flinch. "Observant as always, Sarah. What's gotten into you?" I reached for him, but he jerked away. Don't, he growled. Just don't. I watched helplessly as he staggered to our bedroom, slamming the door behind him. Sleep eluded me that night as I tossed and turned on the couch, my mind racing. The next morning, I woke to find Ethan gone. A hastily scrawled note on the kitchen counter read, "Working late. Don't wait up." I crumpled the note, anger and fear warring in my chest. This couldn't go on. That afternoon, I made a decision. I drove to Marie's house, hoping she might have some insight into her son's behavior. Marie answered the door, her eyes red-rimmed. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you about Ethan," I said, stepping inside. "He's not himself, Marie. I'm worried." She led me to the living room, gesturing for me to sit. "What do you mean, not himself?" I took a deep breath. "He's drinking, staying out late. He won't talk to me. It's like he's turning into Frank." Marie's face darkened. "Don't you dare compare my son to that man." "Marie, please," I pleaded. "I'm just trying to understand." "Understand what?" she snapped. "That my husband was a liar? That he left us with nothing but debt and shame?" I blinked, taken aback by her vehemence. I didn't know it was that bad." Marie laughed bitterly. "Of course you didn't. Frank was very good at hiding things." She fixed me with a hard stare. "And now you're accusing Ethan of the same?" "No, I'm just worried about him, about us." She stood abruptly. "My son is grieving, Sarah. He needs support, not accusations. If you can't provide that, perhaps you should reconsider your place in his life." I left Marie's house feeling worse than when I'd arrived. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Ethan's car was back. Relief flooded through me. But when I entered the house, that relief turned to ice in my veins. Ethan was at his father's desk, papers strewn everywhere, and in his hand was a familiar slip of paper, a betting slip. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice shaking. He looked up, his eyes wild. "I figured it out, Sarah. I know how to fix everything." "What are you talking about?" He waved the betting slip. "Dad's system. It wasn't perfect, but I can make it work. I can win back everything he lost and more." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. This couldn't be happening. "Ethan, no. You can't." "I can," he insisted, a manic gleam in his eye. "And I will. You'll see, Sarah, I'll make everything right again." As I stared at my husband, a stranger wearing Ethan's face, I realized with sickening clarity that our troubles were only just beginning. The weeks that followed were a nightmare. Ethan's obsession with gambling consumed him, and our once peaceful home became a battleground. I tried everything to reason with him, but my words fell on deaf ears. One evening, I came home from grocery shopping to find Ethan pacing in the living room, his face ashen. "Ethan, what's wrong?" He whirled on me, eyes wild. "Where's your jewelry box?" My blood ran cold. "Why?" "I need it," he said, his voice desperate. "Just for a little while. I'm so close, Sarah. One more bet and I can win it all back." I backed away, shaking my head. "No, absolutely not. You don't understand." He lunged forward, grabbing my arms. "I have to do this." I wrenched free, heart pounding. "Stop it, Ethan. This has to end." "End?" He laughed bitterly. "It's only just beginning. I've figured it out, Sarah. Dad's system works. I just need a little more capital." "Listen to yourself," I cried. "You sound just like him." The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. Ethan's face contorted with rage. "I am nothing like him," he roared, sweeping his arm across the coffee table. Books and knickknacks crashed to the floor. I flinched, backing towards the door. "Ethan, please. You need help." "What I need," he snarled, "is a wife who supports me." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then grabbed his keys. "Where are you going?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Out," he snapped. "Don't wait up." The door slammed behind him, leaving me in stunned silence. Daisy crept out from under the couch, meowing softly. I scooped her up, burying my face in her fur as tears began to fall. "What am I going to do, girl?" I whispered. The next morning, I woke to find Ethan hadn't come home. Worry gnawed at me as I went through the motions of my day. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Marie. "Have you heard from Ethan?" I asked when she answered. "Of course," she replied, her tone frosty. "He's here now." Relief washed over me, quickly followed by anger. "He is. Put him on, please." "I don't think that's a good idea," Marie said. "He's very upset." "Upset? I'm the one who should be upset. Do you have any idea what's been going on?" Marie's voice hardened. "I know my son is going through a difficult time, and his wife isn't being very supportive." I gaped at the phone. "Supportive?" He's gambling away everything we have. Don't be ridiculous, Marie scoffed. Ethan would never do that. You're overreacting, as usual. I am not, I began, but she cut me off. I think it's best if Ethan stays here for a while. You clearly need some time to get your priorities straight. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, disbelief and rage warring inside me. How could she be so blind? With shaking hands, I logged into our joint bank account. My heart stopped. Our savings were gone. Every last penny. In a daze, I walked to our bedroom and opened my jewelry box. Empty. The necklace Ethan had given me for our anniversary, the earrings from my grandmother, all gone. As the reality of our situation crashed over me, a cold determination settled in my chest. I couldn't let this continue. I had to protect myself, even if it meant leaving the man I loved. I pulled out a suitcase and began to pack. As I zipped it closed, my eyes fell on a framed photo of Ethan and me on our wedding day. We looked so happy, so full of hope for the future. With a sob, I placed the photo face down. That Ethan was gone, replaced by a stranger I no longer recognized. And I couldn't wait around, hoping he'd come back. As I loaded Daisy into her carrier and my suitcase into the car, I took one last look at the house we'd made a home. Then, with a heavy heart but a firm resolve, I drove away, leaving behind the shattered remains of the life we'd built together. I found temporary refuge at my friend Lisa's apartment, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. After a sleepless night, I steeled myself and dialed Marie's number. It was time to face this head-on. Sarah? Marie's voice was laced with surprise and a hint of disdain. What do you want? We need to talk, I said firmly. About Ethan. Can I come over? A long pause. Fine, but make it quick. An hour later, I stood on Marie's doorstep, heart pounding. She opened the door, her lips pressed into a thin line. Where's Ethan? I asked, stepping inside. Out, she replied curtly. Now what's this about? I took a deep breath. Marie, Ethan has a gambling problem. He's emptied our bank accounts, stolen my jewelry. Nonsense, Marie interrupted. Ethan would never do such a thing. You're just trying to cover up your own failings as a wife. I gaped at her. My failings? Marie, open your eyes. Your son needs help. The only thing my son needs, she hissed, is for you to stop making these ridiculous accusations. Just then the front door burst open. Ethan stumbled in, eyes bloodshot, clothes disheveled. Mom, He froze when he saw me. Sarah, what are you doing here? Trying to knock some sense into your mother, I said, my voice shaking. Ethan, please, tell her the truth. He looked between us, panic flashing across his face. Then, to my horror, he turned to Marie with a pleading expression. Mom, don't listen to her. Sarah's been acting crazy lately. She's the one with the problem. I couldn't believe my ears. Ethan, how can you? See? Marie cut in triumphantly. I knew you were lying. Get out of my house, Sarah, now. No, I said, standing my ground. Not until you both face reality. Ethan, show her your betting slips. Show her our empty bank accounts. Ethan's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, grabbing my arm roughly. I said, shut up. Ethan, Marie gasped. Let her go. For a moment I saw a flicker of the old Ethan in his eyes, shock at his own actions. He released me, stumbling back. I'm sorry, he mumbled. I didn't mean... I rubbed my arm, fighting back tears. This isn't you, Ethan. Please let us help you. Marie looked between us, uncertainty creeping into her expression for the first time. Ethan, darling, what's going on? Ethan's shoulders slumped. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled betting slip. I messed up, Mom. I thought I could fix it, but... Marie's face drained of color as she read the slip. Oh, Ethan, how much? Everything, he whispered. I've lost everything. The room fell silent. I watched as the truth finally sank in for Marie, her world crumbling around her, just as mine had. We need to get you help, I said softly. Real help, Ethan, before it's too late. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I know. I'm so sorry, Sarah, for everything. As I looked at my broken husband and his shattered mother, I felt a mix of emotions, relief that the truth was finally out, anger at the pain they'd put me through, and a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way through this. But as Ethan reached for me, I stepped back. I can't stay here, I said. I need time to think, to figure out what's best for me. Sarah, please, Ethan begged. Don't leave. I met his gaze, my heart breaking all over again. I'm sorry, Ethan, but I have to protect myself now. I hope you get the help you need, I really do. But I can't be the one to save you. With that, I turned and walked out the door, leaving behind the ruins of the life I once knew. As I drove away, I realized that for the first time in months, I could breathe again. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least now I was in control of my own destiny. The weeks following my confrontation with Ethan and Marie were a blur of sleepless nights and anxiety-filled days. I threw myself into my writing, grateful for the distraction it provided. Daisy was my constant companion, her purrs a soothing balm for my frayed nerves. One afternoon, as I was working on a deadline, my phone buzzed. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. My heart raced as I answered. "Sarah?" His voice was small, hesitant. "Can we talk?" I took a deep breath. "About what, Ethan?" I've started therapy. Gamblers Anonymous, too. I want to make things right." I closed my eyes, fighting the surge of hope his words triggered. "I'm glad you're getting help, but—" "Please," he interrupted. "Just hear me out. Can we meet?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. An hour later, I found myself sitting across from Ethan in a quiet cafe. He looked better than the last time I'd seen him. Less haggard, more like the man I'd married. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," he began, his eyes brimming with tears. "For everything. I know I've hurt you beyond words." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I've been working hard in therapy," he continued. "I understand now how my addiction affected you, how I pushed you away. I want to make amends." As he spoke, I felt my resolve wavering. This was the Ethan I knew, the one I'd fallen in love with. But then I remembered the emptied bank accounts, the stolen jewelry, the lies. "I appreciate that, Ethan," I said carefully, "but I don't know if—" He reached across the table, taking my hand. "I know I don't deserve another chance, but I love you, Sarah. We can start over, build something new." I pulled my hand away, my mind reeling. "I need time to think," I said, standing up. "I can't make any decisions right now." As I left the cafe, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Marie. "Sarah, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "It's about Ethan's inheritance." Confused, I agreed to meet her at her house. When I arrived, Marie ushered me in, her face uncharacteristically somber. "I've made a terrible mistake," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "I've enabled Ethan's behavior for far too long." I stared at her, shocked by this admission. "There's something you should know," she continued. "Frank left a substantial inheritance for Ethan, but with conditions. He must complete a rehabilitation program and demonstrate financial responsibility." My mind raced. "Does Ethan know about this?" Marie shook her head. "No, I was afraid it would push him further away, but now I see that was wrong." She took a deep breath. "I want to propose something, a divorce settlement with a hefty alimony for you." I gaped at her. "What?" "It's the least I can do," she said. "You've suffered enough. This way you'll be taken care of, and Ethan will have the motivation he needs to get better." I sat back, stunned. The offer was tempting, a clean break, financial security, but something didn't sit right. "And what about Ethan?" I asked. "He's trying to get better. Wouldn't this feel like abandonment?" Marie's eyes hardened. "Sometimes tough love is necessary. You've given enough, Sarah. It's time to think of yourself." As I left Marie's house, my mind was in turmoil. Ethan's apparent progress, Marie's surprising offer, the revelation about the inheritance. It was all too much. Back in my temporary apartment, I scooped up Daisy, burying my face in her fur. "What should I do, girl?" I whispered. The choice before me was clear, yet impossibly difficult. Do I give Ethan another chance, risking my heart and financial security? Or do I accept Marie's offer, ensuring my own well-being, but potentially derailing Ethan's recovery? As night fell, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. I knew that by morning, I would have to make a decision that would change the course of all our lives forever. The morning after my conversation with Marie, I woke with a sense of dread. I had to make a decision, and fast. As I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Can we talk? It's important." My heart raced. Did he know about Marie's offer? I agreed to meet him at our old favorite park, a place that once held happy memories but now felt tainted by recent events. Ethan was already there when I arrived, pacing nervously. When he saw me, his face lit up with hope, making my chest tighten. "Sarah," he said, reaching for my hand. I let him take it, noticing how his palm felt clammy against mine. "I have something to tell you." I braced myself. "What is it, Ethan?" He took a deep breath. "I've been offered a spot in an intensive rehabilitation program. 6 months, out of state. I want to go, to get better, for us." I felt a mix of emotions, pride, hope, and an overwhelming sadness. "That's wonderful, Ethan. I'm proud of you for taking this step." His eyes searched mine. "Will you wait for me? Give us another chance when I come back?" Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was Marie. With a sinking feeling, I answered. "Sarah." Marie's voice was frantic. "I need to see you immediately. It's about the divorce settlement." I looked at Ethan, who was watching me with confusion. "I'll be right there," I said, hanging up. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, his brow furrowed. I took a deep breath. "Your mother offered me a divorce settlement with alimony." Ethan's face drained of color. "What? When?" "Yesterday," I admitted. I haven't decided anything yet." Anger flashed in Ethan's eyes. "So while I've been working on getting better, you've been plotting to leave me?" "No," I protested. "It's not like that. I was going to tell you." "Save it," he spat. "I should have known you'd give up on me." As Ethan stormed off, I felt my world crumbling. I had to see Marie to understand what was happening. When I arrived at Marie's house, I found her in a state of panic. "Sarah, thank goodness you're here. We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" I asked warily. Marie wrung her hands. "The inheritance, it's gone." I stared at her, uncomprehending. "What do you mean, gone?" "I made a terrible mistake," she whispered. "I thought I could double it, make things right, but I lost it all." The realization hit me like a truck. "You gambled it away." Marie nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I was trying to fix things, to make up for enabling Ethan, but I've ruined everything." I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my throat. "So, there's no alimony? No inheritance for Ethan?" "Nothing," Marie confirmed. "We're both broke." As the gravity of the situation sank in, I felt a strange sense of clarity. All this time I'd been torn between my love for Ethan and my need for security. But now, with everything stripped away, I realized what truly mattered. "I have to go," I said abruptly, leaving a sobbing Marie behind. I raced back to the park, praying Ethan was still there. To my relief, I found him sitting on our old bench, head in his hands. "Ethan," I called out, breathless. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "Come to say goodbye?" I shook my head, sitting beside him. "No, I came to say I'm sorry, and that I love you." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise. "But the settlement—" "There is no settlement," I explained, recounting Marie's confession, "but that doesn't matter. What matters is us fighting this together." As Ethan pulled me into a tight embrace, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had a long, hard road ahead of us, but for the first time in months, I felt like we might just make it. But as we sat there, clinging to each other and our fragile new beginning, I couldn't shake the feeling that our biggest challenge was yet to come. The day Ethan was set to leave for rehab dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the turmoil in my heart. We stood in the airport, the weight of unsaid words hanging between us. "I'll call you when I can," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise, Sarah, I'll get better." I nodded, fighting back tears. "I know you will. I believe in you." As I watched him disappear through security, a mix of hope and fear churned in my stomach. 6 months. We could make it through 6 months. But life had other plans. 2 weeks after Ethan left, I received a frantic call from Marie. "Sarah, you need to come over right away. It's about Ethan." My heart raced as I drove to Marie's house. Had something happened at the rehab center? Marie was pacing when I arrived, her face ashen. "I've made a terrible mistake," she said, her voice quavering. "What are you talking about?" I asked, dread building in my chest. She handed me a stack of papers, her hands shaking. "I found these in Ethan's old room. They're betting slips, recent ones." I flipped through the papers, my world tilting on its axis. The dates on the slips were all from after Ethan had supposedly started his recovery. Some were from just days before he left for rehab. "This can't be right," I whispered, but the evidence was undeniable. Marie collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "I've enabled him again, haven't I? I gave him money for expenses at rehab, but he never went, did he?" The realization hit me like a physical blow. Ethan had lied. Again, he wasn't in rehab. He was out there somewhere, gambling away our last chance at a future. As if on cue, my phone rang. An unknown number. "Hello?" I answered, my voice trembling. "Is this Sarah?" A gruff male voice asked, "I'm calling about your husband, Ethan." My blood ran cold. "Yes, this is Sarah. What's happened?" "Ma'am, I'm afraid your husband owes a substantial amount of money to some less than reputable individuals. They're looking for him and they're not happy." The world seemed to spin around me. How much? I managed to ask. The figure he named made my knees buckle. It was more than we could ever hope to repay. You have 48 hours to come up with the money, the voice continued, or things might get unpleasant for Ethan. The line went dead. I looked at Marie, who had heard every word, her face a mask of horror. What are we going to do? She whispered. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The fear, the anger, the betrayal, it all crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. We're not doing anything, I said, my voice steady. I'm done cleaning up Ethan's messes. He made this bed. Now he has to lie in it, Marie gasped. But Sarah, they could hurt him. I turned to her, years of pent-up frustration boiling over. And what about how he's hurt us? How he's lied, stolen, and gambled away our futures? When does it end, Marie? She flinched at my words, but I couldn't stop. We've coddled him, made excuses for him, and look where it's gotten us. No more. As I spoke, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For too long, I'd put Ethan's needs before my own. No more. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. I'm leaving, Marie. For good this time. Where will you go? She asked, her voice small. I paused at the threshold, a glimmer of my new future taking shape in my mind. Somewhere Ethan can't find me, somewhere I can start over. As I walked out of Marie's house for the last time, I felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. I had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in years, it was mine to shape. I got into my car, Daisy meowing softly from her carrier in the back seat. As I drove away from the life I'd known, I realized that this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. 6 months after I left, I found myself in a small coastal town, rebuilding my life piece by piece. My writing career had taken off, and Daisy and I had settled into a cozy apartment overlooking the ocean. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, my phone rang. Marie's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated before answering. Hello? Sarah? Sarah? Marie's voice was thin, desperate. I need your help, please. I closed my eyes, steeling myself. What is it, Marie? It's Ethan, she sobbed. He's in trouble. Those men he owes money to, they're threatening him. Us, I don't know what to do. A familiar knot of anxiety formed in my stomach. I'm sorry, Marie, but I can't get involved. Not again. But Sarah, you're the only one who can help. You always knew how to handle these situations. I felt a flicker of anger. And look where that got me. I'm done cleaning up after Ethan's messes. Please, Marie begged. I'll do anything. I'll sell the house, my jewelry, everything. Just help us one last time. I paused, considering her words. Then, slowly, I made a decision that would change everything. Okay, Marie, I said, my voice steady. I'll help, but not in the way you think. I booked a flight back to my old town, a mix of dread and determination coursing through me. When I arrived at Marie's house, I found her a shell of her former self, aged beyond her years. Thank you for coming, she whispered, ushering me inside. I took a deep breath. Before we go any further, there's something you need to know, Marie. About Ethan. About everything. Over the next hour, I laid out the whole truth. Ethan's continued gambling, his lies about rehab, the depth of his debts. With each revelation, I watched Marie's world crumble a little more. But why didn't you tell me sooner? She asked, her voice barely audible. I met her gaze steadily. Would you have believed me? Or would you have accused me of lying? Like you always did, Marie flinched, the truth of my words hitting home. I'm telling you now, I continued, because it's time for this cycle to end, for all of us. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. Hello? Yes, I'd like to report a gambling addiction and associated criminal activities. Marie's eyes widened in shock. What are you doing? I held up a hand, silencing her. Yes, I have evidence. Betting slips, bank statements, everything. As I spoke with the authorities, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. This was it, the final step in breaking free from the toxic cycle that had consumed our lives. When I hung up, Marie was crying softly. How could you? She whispered. I took her hand, surprising both of us. This is the only way, Marie. Ethan needs real help, not enablers. And you need to break free too. As we waited for the police to arrive, I felt a strange sense of calm. This wasn't revenge, I realized. It was redemption, for all of us. Hours later, as I watched Ethan being led away in handcuffs, a mix of emotions washed over me. Sadness for the man I once loved, relief that it was finally over, and hope for a future free from the shadows of addiction and deceit. Marie stood beside me, her face tear-stained but resolute. "What happens now?" she asked. I squeezed her hand gently. "Now we heal, separately but maybe someday together." As I drove back to the airport, the sun setting over my old hometown, I felt a sense of closure. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, I was facing it on my own terms. Back in my coastal refuge, I sat on the balcony with Daisy purring in my lap, watching the waves crash against the shore. I thought about trust, about honesty, about the complex web of love and hurt that binds families together. And as the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, I realized that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to let go of the past and embrace an uncertain but hopeful future. With a smile, I picked up my pen and began to write. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning. I stepped out of my condo, desperate for fresh air after a grueling day of trading. The park across the street beckoned, its manicured lawns a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. As I approached, a familiar voice cut through the evening air. "I saw you cheating on your wife last night. You shouldn't be here," Zachary shouted, causing heads to turn. My heart skipped a beat. There, in the middle of the park, stood my ex-husband Kevin, with a young blonde draped over his arm. Zachary, red-faced and trembling, pointed an accusing finger at them. I froze, rooted to the spot. Kevin's eyes met mine, a flicker of surprise quickly replaced by a smug grin. "Claire?" he called out, his voice dripping with false warmth. "What a surprise to see you here. Come, join us." My feet moved of their own accord, propelling me towards the unfolding drama. As I drew closer, I recognized the blonde as Brooke, the woman Kevin had left me for barely a year ago. "Hello, Kevin." I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. Brooke's lips curled into a sneer. "Oh, look, it's the ex-wife, still living in that tiny condo, Claire. I thought you'd have moved on by now." I bit back a retort, focusing instead on Zachary. "What's going on here?" Zachary turned to me, his eyes wild. "This man," he spat, gesturing at Kevin, "is cheating on his wife. I saw him with another woman last night." Kevin laughed, a sound that once made my knees weak but now sent chills down my spine. "Zachary, you're confused. Brooke here is my girlfriend. Claire and I divorced last year." "That's not who I saw you with," Zachary insisted. A crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the spectacle. I felt their eyes on me, pitying, curious, judgmental. My cheeks burned. Now, Kevin said, his tone patronizing. "Let's not make a scene. Claire, why don't you take your friend home? He seems unwell." "He's not my friend," I snapped, "and I'm not going anywhere." Brooke giggled, a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, honey, still can't let go, can you? It's sad, really. Kevin told me how dependent you were, but I had no idea it was this bad." I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. "I am not dependent on anyone, least of all Kevin." Kevin stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. I flinched away from his touch. "Claire, sweetheart, why don't you go home? You look tired. Trading must be so stressful for you these days." His condescension ignited a fire in my chest. "Don't you dare patronize me, Kevin. I'm doing just fine without you." "Are you?" Brooke interjected, "because from where I'm standing, it looks like your life fell apart after the divorce. Still single, still in that same job, still living in that tiny condo. Meanwhile, Kevin and I are thriving." I opened my mouth to retort, but Kevin cut me off. "Now, Brooke, be kind. Claire's doing her best. It's not her fault she couldn't keep up with me." Something in me snapped. Years of pent-up anger and hurt bubbled to the surface. "Keep up with you? Is that what you call it when you manipulate and gaslight someone for years? When you chip away at their confidence until they believe they can't survive without you?" Kevin's eyes widened, his mask of civility slipping for a moment. "Claire, you're making a scene. Think about what people will say." "I don't care what people say," I hissed. "I care about the truth, and the truth is, you're a liar and a cheat, Kevin. You always have been." Brooke stepped between us, her face twisted with anger. "How dare you speak to him like that? You're just jealous because he chose me over you." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Jealous? Of what? Being the next in line for his manipulations? Trust me, honey, you're welcome to him." As I turned to leave, Zachary caught my arm. "Wait," he said, his voice low. "There's more you should know." I hesitated, torn between my desire to flee and my curiosity. In that moment of indecision, I caught a glimpse of something in Kevin's eyes. Fear. And suddenly I knew. This was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. I slammed the door to my condo, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the lock. The encounter in the park had left me reeling, old wounds ripped open and raw. I leaned against the door, closing my eyes and taking a deep breath. The scent of lavender from the diffuser Marie had given me filled the air, a stark contrast to the turmoil in my mind. As I moved through the living room, my eyes fell on a framed photo I'd forgotten to take down. Kevin and I on our wedding day, both smiling, both so young. I picked it up, studying the face of the man I thought I knew. "You were so different then," I whispered, tracing Kevin's face with my finger. Or maybe I was just too blind to see. The memory of our first meeting flooded back, unbidden. The college library, me buried in textbooks, him swaggering up with that charming smile. "Excuse me," he'd said, "but I couldn't help noticing you. I'm Kevin." I'd blushed, stammered out my name. He'd seemed so confident, so worldly. I was smitten from the start. The sound of shattering glass jolted me back to the present. I dropped the frame, the photo now lying amidst shards of glass. As I knelt to clean up the mess, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Joe's Diner in an hour. I have information you need." Zachary. My heart raced. What did he know? An hour later, I slid into a booth at Joe's, scanning the diner for Zachary's familiar face. He appeared moments later, sliding in across from me. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice low. "I wasn't sure you would." "What's this about, Zachary?" I asked, cutting straight to the chase. He leaned forward, his eyes darting around. "It's about Kevin and Brooke. There's more going on than you know." My breath caught. "What do you mean?" "Brooke. She's not who she says she is, and neither is Kevin. Not anymore." Before he could continue, the bell above the diner door jingled. I looked up to see Kevin walk in, his eyes narrowing as he spotted us. "Well, well," he said, approaching our table. "Quite the cozy little meeting we have here." Zachary tensed, but I met Kevin's gaze steadily. "What are you doing here, Kevin?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I could ask you the same thing, Claire. Consorting with strange men now?" "That's rich, coming from you," I shot back. Kevin's smile faltered. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Be careful, Claire. You're playing a dangerous game." "Is that a threat?" I asked, my voice equally low. He straightened, adjusting his tie. "Of course not. Just friendly advice from someone who knows you better than anyone." As he turned to leave, Zachary spoke up. "She knows more than you think, Kevin. It's only a matter of time." Kevin froze, then slowly turned back. For a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Fear, anger, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual mask of confidence. "I don't know what game you two are playing," he said, "but I'd advise you to stop, now, before someone gets hurt." With that, he strode out of the diner, leaving a wake of tension behind him. I turned back to Zachary, my mind reeling. "What was that about? What do you know?" Zachary sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated, Claire, and dangerous. Are you sure you want to get involved?" I thought of Kevin's smug face in the park, of Brooke's cruel words, of years spent doubting myself, diminished by Kevin's subtle manipulations. A fire ignited in my chest, a determination I hadn't felt in years. "I'm already involved," I said, my voice steady. "Tell me everything." Zachary nodded, then leaned in close. "All right, but remember, once you know this, there's no going back." As he began to speak, I felt a shift in the air around me. This was it, the moment everything would change, and I was ready. I stumbled out of Joe's diner, my mind reeling from Zachary's revelations. The cool evening air hit my face, grounding me momentarily. As I fumbled for my car keys, a familiar voice called out, "Claire, is that you?" I turned to see Marie, my neighbor, approaching with a concerned look on her face. At 65, she moved with the grace of the actress she once was, her silver hair catching the streetlight. "Marie," I breathed, relieved to see a friendly face. "What are you doing here?" She raised an eyebrow. "I could ask you the same thing, dear. You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated, then made a split-second decision. "Can we talk? I could use some advice." Marie nodded, linking her arm through mine. "Of course. Let's head back to the building. I'll make us some tea." As we walked, I filled Marie in on the events of the past 2 days. Her eyes widened at the mention of Kevin's infidelity and Zachary's cryptic warnings. Once in her apartment, Marie busied herself with the tea while I sank into her plush sofa. The room was a testament to her colorful past. Playbills adorned the walls, and a shelf full of awards glinted in the soft lamplight. So, Marie said, handing me a steaming cup, what exactly did Zachary tell you? I took a deep breath. He said Kevin and Brooke are involved in something illegal, some kind of investment fraud scheme. And that they're targeting vulnerable people, retirees, widows, people like that. Marie's face darkened. That's despicable. I know, and the worst part is I'm not even surprised. It's exactly the kind of thing Kevin would do. Marie reached out, patting my hand. Claire, listen to me. You're stronger than you know. You've already taken the first step by leaving him. Now it's time to take back your power. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Meet me at the Blue Harbor Quay tomorrow at 2 p.m. Tom. My heart skipped a beat. Tom, my college sweetheart, the one I'd let slip away when Kevin came along. What was he doing here? Everything all right? Marie asked, noticing my expression. I showed her the text. Tom was someone special before Kevin. Marie's eyes twinkled. Well, isn't that interesting timing? The universe works in mysterious ways, dear. The next day, I found myself outside the Blue Harbor Cafe, my stomach in knots. As I approached the entrance, I saw him, Tom, looking even more handsome than I remembered, his salt and pepper hair giving him a distinguished air. Claire, he said, standing as I approached. It's been too long. I smiled, genuinely happy to see him. Tom, what are you doing here? He gestured for me to sit. I heard about what happened with Kevin. I'm so sorry, Claire. I always knew he was bad news. My defenses rose. You didn't come all this way just to say, I told you so, did you? Tom shook his head, leaning in. No, I came because I think you might be in danger. Kevin's gotten himself mixed up with some dangerous people, Claire, and I'm worried you might get caught in the crossfire. My blood ran cold. How do you know all this? I work in corporate security now. We've been investigating a major fraud case, and Kevin's name keeps coming up. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Zachary. They know we talked. Watch your back. I looked up at Tom, fear gripping my heart. Tom, I think you're right. I am in danger. His face hardened with determination. Then let me help you, Claire. We'll figure this out together. As I nodded, accepting his offer, I felt a shift in the air. This was more than just about getting back at Kevin now. This was about survival. And as I looked into Tom's eyes, I realized I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. But for the first time in years, I felt ready to face whatever came next. I stood outside Evelyn's house, my heart pounding. The annual Franklin family gathering loomed before me, a tradition I'd once cherished but now dreaded. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door. The chatter inside died as I entered. Evelyn, my former mother-in-law, approached with a tight smile. Claire, dear, we weren't sure you'd come. I wouldn't miss it, Evelyn, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. As I made my way through the crowd, I caught snippets of hushed conversations. Can't believe she showed up. After what happened with Kevin. I held my head high, refusing to let their whispers affect me. Then I saw him. Kevin, standing in the corner with Brooke draped over his arm. Our eyes met, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something. Regret? Fear? Before his usual smug expression took over. Claire, he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. So glad you could make it. We were just talking about you. I felt the room's attention shift to me. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Were you? I asked, my voice cool. All good things, I hope. Brooke giggled, a sound that grated on my nerves. Oh, we were just saying how well you seem to be coping. Living in that tiny condo, still at the same job. It's admirable, really. I saw red. All the anger, all the hurt I'd been holding back surged to the surface. You know what's really admirable, Brooke? The way you've managed to keep your little side business a secret for so long. The room fell silent. Kevin's face paled. Claire, what are you talking about? I turned to face the room. Did you all know that Kevin and his lovely girlfriend here are involved in an investment fraud scheme? Targeting retirees and widows, no less. Gasps echoed through the room. Evelyn stepped forward, her face a mask of shock. Claire, that's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof? I pulled out my phone, bringing up the files Tom had helped me compile. I have bank statements, emails, recorded conversations. Would you like to see them, Evelyn? Kevin lunged forward, grabbing my arm. You have no idea what you're doing, he hissed. I wrenched my arm free. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm exposing you for the fraud you are, Kevin, both personally and professionally. Brooke's face contorted with rage. You bitch! You'll regret this. No, Brooke, I said calmly. The only thing I regret is not seeing Kevin for who he really was sooner. I turned to Evelyn, whose face had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Evelyn, but your son isn't the man you think he is. As the room erupted into chaos, I made my way to the door. Kevin's voice rang out behind me. Claire, don't do this, please. We can work something out. I paused at the threshold, turning back to face him one last time. It's too late for that, Kevin. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The truth was out, and there was no going back. My phone buzzed, a text from Tom. How did it go? Are you okay? I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. But as I walked to my car, a chill ran down my spine. I remembered Zachary's warning about dangerous people. Had I just painted a target on my back? I got into my car, my mind racing. What would Kevin and Brooke do now that they'd been exposed? How far would they go to protect themselves? And more importantly, what was my next move? As I drove away from Evelyn's house, I knew one thing for certain. The real battle was just beginning. And I had to be ready for whatever came next. I paced my living room, adrenaline still coursing through my veins from the confrontation at Evelyn's. My phone buzzed incessantly. Missed calls from Kevin, angry texts from Brooke, concerned messages from family members. I ignored them all, focusing instead on my next move. A knock at the door startled me. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. Marie stood outside, her face etched with concern. Claire, dear, are you all right? She asked as I opened the door. I heard about what happened at the gathering. I ushered her in, grateful for her presence. I'm fine, Marie. Just processing everything. She settled on the couch, patting the spot next to her. Tell me everything. As I recounted the events, Marie's expression shifted from concern to determination. Claire, you've taken the first step. Now we need to make sure you're protected. Protected? I echoed. Marie nodded gravely. Kevin and Brooke won't take this lying down. We need to be prepared for their retaliation. As if on cue, my phone rang. Tom's name flashed on the screen. Claire, he said urgently when I answered. I've been doing some digging. The fraud goes deeper than we thought. There are some powerful people involved. My heart raced. How powerful? Powerful enough to make problems disappear, Tom replied ominously. We need to meet. Now. I agreed, ending the call with shaking hands. Marie squeezed my arm. Go. I'll stay here and keep an eye on things. An hour later, I sat across from Tom in a dimly lit cafe, my mind reeling from the information he'd shared. The fraud scheme wasn't just about money. It involved blackmail, political favors, and even ties to organized crime. Claire, Tom said softly, reaching for my hand. You're in over your head. Maybe we should go to the authorities. I pulled my hand away, shaking my head. No, I've come too far to back down now. There must be a way to expose all of this. Tom's eyes widened. It's dangerous, Claire. These people won't hesitate to. A commotion at the cafe entrance cut him off. My blood ran cold as I saw Kevin push his way inside, his face contorted with rage. You! He snarled, storming towards our table. Do you have any idea what you've done? I stood facing him squarely. I've done what I should have done years ago, Kevin. Exposed you for who you really are. He grabbed my arm, his grip painfully tight. You've ruined everything, and for what? Revenge? Tom intervened, pushing Kevin back. Let her go, Kevin, it's over. Kevin's eyes darted between us, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Oh, I see, you two are in this together, how touching. He leaned in close, his voice a menacing whisper. You have no idea what you're up against, Claire. Back off now, or I promise you'll regret it. With that, he stormed out, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. I sank back into my chair, my mind racing. Tom reached across the table, his eyes filled with concern. Claire, we need to be smart about this. Kevin's right, we don't know what we're up against. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. No, Tom, we can't back down now. Too many people have been hurt by this scheme. We need to end it. But how? Tom asked. A plan began to form in my mind. It was risky, potentially dangerous, but it might be our only chance. The community gala next week, I said slowly. Everyone will be there. It's the perfect opportunity to expose everything. Tom's eyes widened. Claire, that's incredibly risky. Are you sure about this? I met his gaze, feeling a surge of determination. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. As we left the cafe, I knew I was standing at a crossroads. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. Kevin and his cronies had underestimated me for the last time. The seeds of retribution had been sown. Now it was time to watch them grow. The grand ballroom of the Ocean View Hotel buzzed with anticipation. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the city's elite, gathered for the annual community gala. I smoothed down my midnight blue gown, my heart racing beneath the silky fabric. Tonight was the night. Everything I'd worked for, every piece of evidence I'd gathered, it all came down to this moment. I scanned the room, spotting Kevin and Brooke near the bar. They looked confident, unaware of the storm about to break. Tom appeared at my side, his hand brushing mine reassuringly. "Are you ready?" he whispered. I nodded, my throat tight. "As I'll ever be." We made our way through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with familiar faces. I caught sight of Marie, elegant in a silver gown, giving me an encouraging nod. My ally in this fight. The MC's voice boomed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Kevin Franklin." Applause filled the room as Kevin took the stage, his charismatic smile firmly in place. I felt a familiar twist in my gut, remembering how that smile once fooled me. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Kevin began. "As you know, our community has always prided itself on integrity and trust." I almost laughed at the irony. As Kevin continued his speech, I made my way to the AV booth where Tom's friend waited with our evidence queued up. "Now?" he asked as I approached. I took a deep breath. "Now." Suddenly, the large screen behind Kevin flickered to life. His voice faltered as images and documents began to flash across the screen. Bank statements, emails, recorded conversations, all damning evidence of the fraud scheme he and Brooke had been running. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Kevin's face paled as he realized what was happening. "What is this?" he demanded, his composure cracking. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "This, Kevin, is the truth about your business ventures, about how you've been scamming innocent people out of their life savings." Brooke rushed to the stage, her face contorted with rage. "You bitch! You'll pay for this!" Security guards moved in, but I stood my ground. "No, Brooke. You and Kevin are the ones who will pay. The authorities are already on their way." As if on cue, sirens wailed in the distance. Panic erupted in the ballroom. People pushed towards the exits, whispering and pointing. In the chaos, I lost sight of Kevin and Brooke. Suddenly, a hand gripped my arm, yanking me backwards. Kevin's voice hissed in my ear. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you've done." I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened painfully. "Let go of me, Kevin." "Not until you listen," he snarled. "This goes deeper than you know. There are people involved who won't hesitate to silence you permanently." Fear coursed through me, but I refused to show it. "Is that a threat?" His eyes were wild, desperate. "It's a warning. For old time's sake, get out of town, Claire. Disappear. It's your only chance." Before I could respond, Tom appeared, forcefully separating us. "It's over, Kevin. Let her go." Kevin's gaze darted between us, a mix of anger and something else, fear, in his eyes. "You're both fools," he spat, before disappearing into the crowd. As the police burst into the ballroom, Tom pulled me close. "Are you okay?" I nodded, my mind reeling. We'd done it. We'd exposed the truth. But Kevin's warning echoed in my ears. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. In the chaos of arrests and questioning that followed, one thought kept circling in my mind. What had I unleashed? And more importantly, how far was I willing to go to see this through to the end? As I watched Kevin being led away in handcuffs, our eyes met one last time. In that moment, I realized the true battle was just beginning, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. The days following the gala were a whirlwind of police interviews, media frenzy, and sleepless nights. I sat in my condo, surrounded by newspapers emblazoned with headlines about Kevin's arrest and the unraveling of his fraud scheme. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends, family, and even strangers offering congratulations or seeking information. A sharp knock at the door jolted me from my thoughts. I approached cautiously, my nerves still on edge. Through the peephole, I saw a face I never expected to see again. Kevin. My heart raced as I opened the door, keeping the security chain in place. What are you doing here? How did you get out? His once confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a haggard, desperate look. Please, Claire, I need to talk to you. It's important. Against my better judgment, I let him in. He stumbled into the living room, collapsing onto the couch. Claire, he began, his voice breaking. I'm sorry for everything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need your help. I stood, arms crossed, maintaining my distance. Help with what, Kevin? Haven't you done enough damage? He looked up, his eyes wild with fear. You were right about everything. The fraud, the lies, but it goes deeper than you know. There are people involved, powerful people. They're coming after me, and they'll come after you too. A chill ran down my spine. What are you talking about? The scheme wasn't just about money, Kevin explained, his words tumbling out. It was about power, influence. We were laundering money for some very dangerous individuals, and now that it's all out in the open, they want to tie up loose ends. I felt the room spin. And I'm a loose end? Kevin nodded grimly. We both are. Claire, I know I have no right to ask, but we need to work together. It's the only way we'll survive this. Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was Tom. Claire, he said urgently, are you okay? There's been a break-in at my office. All our files on Kevin's case are gone. My blood ran cold. I looked at Kevin, who seemed to shrink under my gaze. Tom, I need you to come over, now, and bring Marie if you can. Within the hour, my small condo was filled with tension. Tom paced by the window, while Marie sat beside me, her hand on my arm. Kevin sat alone, looking defeated. So what do we do now? Tom asked, his voice tight with anger. I took a deep breath, weighing our options. We need to go to the authorities, tell them everything. Kevin shook his head vehemently. No, you don't understand. These people have connections everywhere. The police, the government, we'd be signing our death warrants. Marie spoke up, her voice calm but firm. Then what do you suggest, Kevin? Run? Hide? That's no way to live. A heavy silence fell over the room. I felt the weight of the decision on my shoulders. Everything I'd fought for, my newfound independence, my future with Tom, it was all at risk. Suddenly, a crash echoed through the condo as the living room window shattered. A brick lay among the glass shards, a note tied around it. With shaking hands, I unfolded the paper. 2 words were scrawled in red. Back off. Tom pulled me close, his body tense. That's it. We're getting you out of here. But as I looked around at the faces of those I cared about, Tom, Marie, and even Kevin, I knew I couldn't run. This was my fight, and I had to see it through. No, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. We end this. Now. I met each of their gazes, seeing a mix of fear and determination reflected back. In that moment, I realized that the true test of my strength wasn't just in exposing Kevin's lies, but in facing the consequences of my actions. As sirens wailed in the distance, I steeled myself for what was to come. The final battle was upon us, and I was ready to fight. The salty breeze tousled my hair as I sat at our favorite seaside cafe, waiting for Tom. The past few months had been a whirlwind of legal battles, police protection, and finally justice. Kevin and his co-conspirators were behind bars, the dangerous individuals backing their scheme exposed and facing prosecution. It felt surreal, like waking from a long, tumultuous dream. I spotted Tom walking towards me, his smile warming me more than the afternoon sun. As he sat down, he reached for my hand, his touch grounding me in the present. How are you feeling? He asked, his eyes searching mine. I took a deep breath, considering the question. Relieved, exhausted, but mostly free. Tom nodded, understanding etched in his features. We'd been through hell together, facing threats, navigating the complex web of Kevin's deceit, and ultimately emerging stronger. Our relationship, rekindled amidst the chaos, had been my anchor. I have something to tell you, I said, my heart racing with a different kind of anticipation now. Tom leaned in, concern flickering across his face. What is it, Claire? I placed my free hand on my stomach, a smile tugging at my lips. I'm pregnant. His eyes widened, a mix of shock and joy spreading across his face. Oh, Claire. He stood up, pulling me into an embrace that lifted me off my feet. As he set me down, I saw tears in his eyes matching my own. Are you happy? I asked, suddenly feeling vulnerable. Tom cupped my face in his hands. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. I love you, Claire. You and our baby. As we sat back down, hands intertwined, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This was what I had fought for, not just justice, but the chance at a new life, filled with love and possibility. "You know," Tom said, his thumb tracing circles on my hand, "I've been thinking about the future. About us." I raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. "Oh." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. My breath caught in my throat. "Claire Franklin," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "you are the strongest, most resilient woman I know. You've faced your past, fought for your future, and through it all, you've shown me what true courage looks like. I want to spend the rest of my life by your side, supporting you, loving you, and building a family together. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down my face as I nodded, words failing me. As Tom slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt the final pieces of my new life falling into place. Later that evening, as we walked along the beach, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. I thought of Marie, whose wisdom and support had been invaluable, of Evelyn, who had eventually seen the truth about her son, and even of Kevin, whose actions had inadvertently set me on this path to self-discovery and true happiness. "What are you thinking about?" Tom asked, squeezing my hand. I smiled, looking out at the endless horizon. About how sometimes the threads of our lives that seem to unravel are actually weaving us into something stronger, more beautiful. As we stood there, the waves lapping at our feet, I placed a hand on my stomach, feeling the promise of new life growing within me. I had faced my past, reclaimed my power, and now I was ready to embrace the future. Not as the woman Kevin had tried to mold me into, but as the resilient, independent person I had always been meant to be. The sun dipped below the horizon, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. With Tom by my side and a new life growing inside me, I felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. For the first time in years, I was truly completely free, and in that freedom, I had found my strength, my voice, and my happily ever after. I smoothed my dress for the 100th time, taking a deep breath before stepping into the grand foyer of the Finnegan estate. The chandelier sparkled overhead, casting a warm glow on the polished marble floors. This was it, my official introduction to Daniel's family as his wife. "There you are, darling," Daniel said, appearing at my side. He squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Ready to meet everyone?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "As ready as I'll ever be." We made our way through the crowd of well-dressed guests, stopping to chat with various aunts, uncles, and cousins. I tried to keep track of names and faces, but it was overwhelming. Just as I was starting to relax, I heard a sharp voice behind me. "So this is the new Mrs. Reed." I turned to find myself face-to-face with Adelaide Finnegan, my mother-in-law. Her critical gaze swept over me, lingering on my simple cocktail dress. "It's lovely to finally meet you, Mrs. Finnegan," I said. Extending my hand, she ignored it, instead lifting her crystal wine glass. "I do hope you'll make an effort to learn about wine, dear. It is the family business, after all." Daniel stepped in. "Mom, Ella's already quite knowledgeable about—" "Oh, please, Daniel," Adelaide cut him off. "I'm sure your physical therapist wife has many talents, but I doubt wine appreciation is one of them." I felt my cheeks burning. "Actually, Adelaide!" A booming voice interrupted. Gregory Finnegan approached, clapping a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "There you are. I see you've met our Ella." Adelaide's lips thinned. "Yes, we were just discussing her expertise." Gregory turned to me with a warm smile. "Don't let this one intimidate you," he said, jerking a thumb at his wife. "I'm sure you'll fit right in." "Thank you, Mr. Finnegan," I said gratefully. "Please call me Gregory. We're family now." Adelaide's nostrils flared. "Speaking of family, I believe it's time for the toast. Daniel, come along." As they walked away, I overheard Adelaide hissing, "Really, Daniel, a physical therapist? What were you thinking?" I blinked back tears, trying to compose myself. A server passed by with a tray of wine glasses, and I grabbed one, downing half of it in one gulp. "Whoa there," a voice said. I turned to see a woman in her late 50s smiling at me. "First time meeting Adelaide?" I nodded ruefully. "That obvious?" She laughed. "I'm Rosemary, a distant cousin. Don't worry, we've all been there. Adelaide can be challenging." "That's putting it mildly," I muttered. Rosemary patted my arm. "Just remember, you married Daniel, not his mother. Now come on, let's get you another drink before the toast." We made our way to the bar where Rosemary ordered 2 glasses of red wine. As we waited, I noticed Adelaide glaring at us from across the room. "So, Ella," Rosemary said, "tell me about yourself. How did you and Daniel meet?" I launched into the story, grateful for the distraction. Just as I was finishing, Daniel appeared at my side. "There you are," he said, kissing my cheek. "I see you've met Rosemary." "Yes, she's been very kind," I replied. Daniel lowered his voice. "Listen, I'm sorry about my mother. She'll come around, I promise." Before I could respond, Gregory clinked his glass for attention. "If I could have everyone's attention, please. I'd like to propose a toast to the newest member of our family, Ella Reed." All eyes turned to me, and I felt my face flush. Adelaide's gaze was particularly piercing. Gregory continued, "To Ella, who has already brought so much joy to our Daniel, may she always feel welcome in our home and our hearts." As glasses clinked around me, I took a sip of wine, praying I wouldn't choke. Suddenly Adelaide's voice rang out, and perhaps Ella would like to say a few words. After all, she is joining quite a prestigious family. I'm sure she has some thoughts on the matter. The room fell silent. Daniel squeezed my hand, but I knew I had to face this on my own. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, my wine glass trembling slightly in my hand. I never expected a wine magazine to be the catalyst for World War III in the Finnegan household, but here we were. The latest issue of Vintner's Voice had just arrived, and Adelaide's shrill voice echoed through the manor. "This is preposterous," she shrieked, storming into the living room where Daniel and I were enjoying a quiet morning. "How dare they give our Celestial Cabernet only 88 points? It's an outrage," Daniel sighed, setting down his coffee. "Mom, it's just one review. We can't expect top marks every time." Adelaide's eyes narrowed. "Just one review? This could ruin us, Daniel. Our reputation." "Is still intact," I interjected, trying to keep my voice calm. 88 points is still a good score." She whirled on me, her face flushed. "What would you know about it? You probably can't tell the difference between a fine wine and grape juice." I bit my tongue, reminding myself that engaging would only make things worse. Daniel stood up, placing a hand on his mother's arm. "Mom, that's enough. Ella's right. We shouldn't overreact." Adelaide jerked away from him, flipping through the magazine. Suddenly, she froze, her eyes widening. What is this?" I leaned forward, curious despite myself. There, on the page, was a glowing review of a wine I'd suggested for our new budget-friendly line. 95 points and a Critics' Choice Award. "Impossible," Adelaide muttered. This swill? It can't be." "That's wonderful news," Gregory said, entering the room. "Ella, this was your idea, wasn't it?" "Well done." Adelaide's head snapped up, her gaze locking onto me with laser-like intensity. "You," she hissed. "You did this on purpose, didn't you? To humiliate me?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "What? No, of course not. I just thought. You thought you'd show up the family expert, is that it?" Adelaide advanced on me, her voice rising. "Little Miss Nobody from Nowhere, thinking she can waltz in and take over." Daniel stepped between us. "Mom, stop it. This isn't Ella's fault." "Oh, defend her. Why don't you?" Adelaide sneered. "Your precious wife, who probably learned everything she knows about wine from the bargain bin at the grocery store." The room fell silent. I could feel tears pricking at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Gregory cleared his throat awkwardly. "Adelaide, that's quite enough," he said firmly. "Ella's contribution has clearly been valuable. We should be celebrating, not." "Celebrating?" Adelaide laughed bitterly. "Oh yes, let's celebrate the death of standards in this family. First Daniel marries a commoner, and now we're praising cheap plunk. What's next? Boxed wine?" I couldn't take it anymore. Standing up, I faced Adelaide directly. "Mrs. Finnegan, I understand you're upset about the review, but that doesn't give you the right to insult me or my background. I may not have grown up in your world, but I'm here now, and I'm trying my best to contribute." Adelaide's eyes glittered dangerously. "Oh, you're contributing all right, to the downfall of everything this family has built. You think you can just walk in here with your middle-class tastes and change everything?" "That's enough," Daniel shouted, startling us all. "Mom, I love you, but I won't stand here and let you talk to my wife like this. Ella is family now, whether you like it or not." Adelaide recoiled as if she'd been slapped. For a moment, I thought she might apologize. Instead, she straightened her spine and looked down her nose at me. "Family?" she said coldly. We'll see about that. This isn't over, Ella. Not by a long shot. With that, she swept out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Daniel put his arm around me, pulling me close. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I never thought she'd react like this." Gregory sighed heavily. "I'll talk to her. Try not to worry, Ella. This will blow over." But, as I watched him leave, following in Adelaide's wake, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Adelaide's words echoed in my mind. This isn't over. I had a sinking feeling she was right, and that the worst was yet to come. The annual Finnegan family reunion was in full swing, and I felt like a fish out of water. Everywhere I turned, there were cousins, aunts, and uncles I'd never met, all eyeing me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Adelaide's influence was clear. Whispers followed me like a shadow. "There's Daniel's new wife," I overheard one elderly aunt say. "The physical therapist. Can you imagine?" I gritted my teeth and plastered on a smile, determined not to let them see how much it hurt. Daniel squeezed my hand reassuringly as we made our rounds. "Don't let them get to you," he murmured. "They'll come around eventually." But as the day wore on, I wasn't so sure. Every attempt I made to connect was met with polite disinterest or thinly veiled disdain. Even Gregory, usually my ally, seemed distant and preoccupied. Things came to a head during dinner. I was seated between Daniel and Rosemary, grateful for at least one friendly face. Adelaide held court at the head of the table, regaling everyone with stories of the family's winemaking legacy. "Of course, maintaining our standards is of utmost importance," she said, her eyes flicking to me. "We can't let just anyone influence our process." I felt Daniel tense beside me. Before he could speak, I laid a hand on his arm. "It's okay," I whispered. "Let it go." But Adelaide wasn't finished. "Daniel, darling, why don't you tell everyone about the new vintage you're working on? The one using traditional methods?" Daniel cleared his throat. "Actually, Mom, I've been experimenting with some new techniques lately. Ella had some interesting ideas." "Ella?" Adelaide's laugh was like shattered glass. "And what, pray tell, does a physical therapist know about winemaking?" The table fell silent. I could feel every eye on me, waiting for my response. My cheeks burned, but I forced myself to meet Adelaide's gaze. "I may not have grown up in the wine industry," I said quietly, "but I've been learning, and sometimes a fresh perspective can lead to innovation." Adelaide's eyes narrowed. "Innovation? Is that what we're calling it now? Diluting generations of expertise with amateur opinions?" "That's enough, Mom," Daniel said sharply. "Ella's ideas have merit. The critics seem to think so, anyway." A collective gasp went around the table. Adelaide's face turned an alarming shade of red. "How dare you bring that up here?" she hissed. "In front of the entire family." "Why not?" Daniel shot back. "Aren't we supposed to celebrate each other's successes?" The tension in the room was palpable. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and vanish. But I forced myself to sit up straight, refusing to be cowed. Adelaide stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I will not sit here and be insulted in my own home. Daniel, when you're ready to remember where your loyalties should lie, you know where to find me." With that, she stormed out of the dining room. An uncomfortable silence descended, broken only by the clink of silverware as people awkwardly resumed eating. Gregory sighed heavily. "I apologize for that, everyone. Please enjoy your meal." As dinner wrapped up, I retreated to the terrace, needing a moment alone. The cool night air was a balm to my frayed nerves. I heard footsteps behind me and turned, expecting to see Daniel. Instead, it was Gregory. "Quite a show in there," he said, joining me at the railing. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "You know," Gregory continued, "Adelaide wasn't always like this. She used to be kinder, more open to new ideas." "What changed?" I asked softly. Gregory's eyes were distant. "Time, pressure, the weight of expectations, carrying on a family legacy." I turned to face him fully. "Mr. Finnegan, Gregory, I want you to know that I'm not trying to change everything. I respect this family's history. I just want to contribute, to be a part of it." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you, Ella. And for what it's worth, I think you're good for Daniel. For all of us, really." Just then, we heard raised voices from inside. Daniel and Adelaide were arguing, their words muffled, but their tones clear. "I should go," I said, moving towards the door. Gregory caught my arm. "Ella, wait. There's something you should know about Adelaide, something that might explain. But before he could finish, the terrace doors burst open. Daniel stood there, his face a mask of anger and hurt. "That's it," he said, his voice shaking. "I'm done. We're leaving." As he took my hand and led me away, I caught one last glimpse of Adelaide's face through the window. The triumph in her eyes sent a chill down my spine. Whatever Gregory had been about to tell me, I had a feeling things were about to get much, much worse. The tension in the Finnegan household was palpable as we gathered for the monthly family meeting. Daniel and I sat side by side, our hands clasped tightly under the table. Adelaide's eyes bore into us from across the room, her lips pursed in a thin line of disapproval. Gregory cleared his throat. "Now, as you all know, our annual charity gala is coming up. We need to finalize the wine selection for the event." Before anyone could speak, Adelaide's voice cut through the air like a knife. "I nominate Ella to lead the wine selection committee this year." My head snapped up in shock. Daniel's grip on my hand tightened. "Mom, that's not fair," he protested. "Ella's still learning about—" "Oh," Adelaide's eyebrow arched. "I thought you said her ideas had merit. Surely she's up to the task?" I could feel the trap closing in around me. If I refused, I'd be admitting my inadequacy. If I accepted, I'd be setting myself up for failure in front of the entire wine community. Taking a deep breath, I met Adelaide's gaze. I'd be honored to lead the committee. A flicker of surprise crossed Adelaide's face before she masked it with a smug smile. "Wonderful. I'm sure you'll do your best." As the meeting adjourned, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Rosemary, her eyes filled with concern. "Ella, dear, are you sure about this? The gala is a big deal. The wrong choice could be disastrous for the family's reputation." I nodded, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "I know, but I have to try." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into research. I consulted wine experts, pored over vintage charts, and tasted more wines than I could count. Daniel supported me every step of the way, but I could see the strain it was putting on him. One evening, as I was finalizing my selections, Daniel entered our study looking troubled. "Ella, I just got off the phone with Mom. She's not happy with your choices." I sighed, rubbing my temples. Of course she's not. "What did she say?" Daniel hesitated. "She thinks they're too unconventional. She's threatening to go to the board if you don't change them." I felt a surge of anger. "She can't do that. This is my responsibility now." I know, Daniel said, pulling me into a hug. "We'll figure it out." The night before the gala, I was doing one last check of the wine cellar when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Adelaide, her face unreadable in the dim light. "Mrs. Finnegan," I said cautiously, "can I help you with something?" She moved closer, her eyes never leaving mine. "I just wanted to see how our little sommelier was doing. Nervous?" I straightened my spine. "No, I'm confident in my choices." Adelaide's laugh was cold. "Oh, my dear, confidence won't save you when you serve subpar wine to some of the most discerning palates in the country." As she turned to leave, she paused. "You know, it's not too late to change your mind. I'd be happy to assist you." I shook my head. "Thank you, but I've made my decision." "Very well," she said softly. "On your head be it." The morning of the gala dawned bright and clear. As I entered the cellar to begin preparations, something felt off. I approached the cases containing my carefully selected wines, my heart pounding. With trembling hands, I opened the first bottle, bringing it to my nose. The acrid smell hit me immediately. Corked. I grabbed another bottle, then another. All ruined. Panic rose in my throat as the realization hit me. Someone had tampered with the wine, and I had a sickening feeling I knew exactly who was responsible. My mind raced. The gala was hours away. Hundreds of guests would be arriving soon. I had no time to source new wines, and using the backup selection would be admitting defeat. As I stood there, surrounded by spoiled wine, I knew I had to make a choice. I could either admit defeat and let Adelaide win, or I could find a way to turn this disaster into an opportunity. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out my phone. It was time to call in some favors and take the biggest risk of my life. The gala was in full swing, and I felt like I was walking on eggshells. My last-minute wine selections had arrived just in time, thanks to a few frantic calls to some industry contacts I'd made. As I surveyed the room, I could see guests mingling, crystal glasses in hand, none the wiser to the chaos that had preceded this moment. "Ella, darling." Adelaide's voice cut through the crowd. She glided towards me, a predatory smile on her face. "How are your selections being received?" I forced a smile. "Quite well, thank you. The Malbec seems to be a particular hit." Adelaide's eyes narrowed. "Is that so? How unexpected." Before I could respond, Gregory appeared at my side. "Ella, my dear, I must say I'm impressed. The wines are exquisite. Where did you source that Chenin Blanc?" I opened my mouth to answer, but Adelaide cut in. "Yes, Ella, do tell us. I'm sure we'd all love to know where you found such unique choices at the last minute." The accusation in her tone was clear. I felt a bead of sweat form on my brow. Suddenly, a commotion near the buffet table caught everyone's attention. One of the guests, an influential wine critic, was doubled over, retching violently. "Oh my God," someone gasped. "Is he all right?" As chaos erupted around us, Adelaide's voice rose above the din. "It must be the wine. Ella, what have you done?" All eyes turned to me. I felt the room spinning, my carefully laid plans crumbling around me. "No, that's impossible. I tasted everything myself. It was fine." Gregory stepped forward, his face grave. "Ella, I think you'd better explain what's going on." With trembling hands, I recounted the discovery of the spoiled wine and my scramble to replace it. As I spoke, I saw doubt and suspicion creep into the faces of those around me. Adelaide's triumphant smirk was almost unbearable. "You see? I told you she wasn't up to this task. Now she's poisoned our guests." "That's not true," I protested. "Someone tampered with the original selection. I had to." "Tampered?" Adelaide gasped, feigning shock. "Are you accusing someone in this family of sabotage?" The tension in the room was palpable. I could see Daniel pushing his way through the crowd, Fiz's concern etched on his face. But before he could reach me, Gregory held up a hand. "Enough," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Ella, these are serious accusations. Do you have any proof?" I hesitated, my mind racing. I don't, but—" "Then I think it's best if you leave," Gregory said, his disappointment evident. "We'll discuss this later." As security began to escort me out, I caught sight of Adelaide's smug expression. Something inside me snapped. I couldn't let her win. Not like this. "Wait," I called out, my voice stronger than I felt. "There's something you all need to know." The room fell silent. Even Adelaide looked taken aback by my sudden outburst. "I may not have proof of the tampering," I said, my heart pounding, "but I do have proof that the wines I served tonight are not responsible for what happened. Because they're not the wines I originally selected." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Gregory's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Taking a deep breath, I launched into the full story. The spoiled wine, my frantic calls, the last-minute substitutions. As I spoke, I saw realization dawning on some faces, skepticism on others. "If you don't believe me," I finished, "check the cellar. The original ruined bottles are still there." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, to my surprise, Rosemary stepped forward. "I'll go with you," she said. "I want to see for myself." As we turned to leave, I caught Adelaide's eye. The look of fury and fear on her face told me everything I needed to know. This was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like I might have a fighting chance. Gregory's voice stopped us at the door. "Ella," he said, his tone unreadable. "When we return, I expect a full explanation, and if what you're saying is true, there will be consequences." I nodded, squaring my shoulders. As we headed for the cellar, I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The truth was about to come out, and there was no turning back now. The cellar was eerily quiet as Rosemary and I descended the stairs, followed closely by Gregory and a handful of curious guests. The weight of the moment pressed down on me, making each step feel like a mile. "Here," I said, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "This is where I found the spoiled wine." I led them to the rack where I'd made my grim discovery earlier that day. With trembling hands, I pulled out a bottle and uncorked it. The acrid smell of vinegar filled the air, causing several people to recoil. "Good Lord," Gregory muttered, his face pale. This is unthinkable." Rosemary stepped forward, her brow furrowed. "Ella, dear, when exactly did you discover this?" I recounted the events of the morning, watching as understanding dawned on their faces. As I finished, Rosemary's eyes widened. "I saw Adelaide down here early this morning," she said slowly. "She said she was doing a final check, but—" A collective gasp went through the group. Gregory's face hardened. "Are you certain, Rosemary?" She nodded, her expression grim. "Positive. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now... Before anyone could respond, we heard footsteps on the stairs. Adelaide appeared, her face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "What's going on down here?" she asked, her gaze darting between us. "Shouldn't we be attending to our guests?" Gregory turned to face his wife, his voice low and dangerous. "Adelaide, did you tamper with the wine?" For a moment, Adelaide's composure slipped. I saw fear flash in her eyes before she recovered. "Gregory, darling, what are you talking about? Of course not." "Then how do you explain this?" I asked, holding up the spoiled bottle. Adelaide's eyes narrowed. "Well, clearly you've made a mistake in your selections. I told you she wasn't up to this task, Gregory." But her words lacked their usual venom. I could see doubt creeping into the faces around us. Suddenly, Daniel burst into the cellar, his face flushed. "What's going on? Ella, are you okay?" Before I could answer, Rosemary spoke up. "Daniel, I'm afraid we've uncovered something rather disturbing. It appears your mother may have sabotaged Ella's wine selection." Daniel's face went from confusion to shock to anger in a matter of seconds. "Mom, is this true?" Adelaide's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. "Daniel, sweetheart, you can't possibly believe—" "I saw you, Adelaide," Rosemary interrupted. "This morning in the cellar. You were here alone with the wine." The silence that followed was deafening. Adelaide's gaze darted around the room, looking for an ally and finding none. Finally, her shoulders sagged. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I was trying to protect us, our legacy. She jabbed a finger at me, was going to ruin everything with her common tastes and lack of refinement." The admission hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt Daniel's hand slip into mine, squeezing tightly. Gregory's voice, when he spoke, was filled with a quiet fury. "Adelaide, do you realize what you've done? You've not only betrayed our family, but potentially put our guests at risk. This is unforgivable." Adelaide's face crumpled. "Gregory, please." But he held up a hand, silencing her. "We'll discuss this later. For now, I think it's best if you retire to your room. We have a gala to salvage." As Adelaide was led away, her sobs echoing through the cellar, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. I'd won, but at what cost? Gregory turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Ella, I owe you an apology, and I believe we all owe you our gratitude. Your quick thinking may have saved us from disaster." The others murmured in agreement, but I barely heard them. My mind was reeling, trying to process everything that had just happened. As we made our way back upstairs, Daniel pulled me aside. "Ella, I'm so sorry. I never thought my mother would go this far." I looked into his eyes, seeing the pain and conflict there. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel shook his head. "I don't know, but whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As we rejoined the gala, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The truth was out, but the real battle was far from over. The gala had devolved into a maelstrom of whispers and sidelong glances. As Daniel and I re-entered the main hall, the tension was palpable. Gregory cleared his throat, addressing the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. We've had a situation arise that requires our immediate attention. I'm afraid we'll have to cut the evening short." A chorus of murmurs rippled through the guests. I could feel their eyes on me, questioning, accusing. My cheeks burned with a mix of shame and anger. Suddenly, Adelaide's voice rang out from the top of the grand staircase. "Oh, don't let me spoil your fun." All heads turned. Adelaide stood there, her hair disheveled, a half-empty wine bottle clutched in her hand. She looked wild, unhinged. "Mother," Daniel said, his voice low and warning, "please don't do this." But Adelaide was beyond reason. She descended the stairs, her eyes locked on me. "You," she spat, "you little upstart. You think you can waltz in here and destroy everything I've built?" I stood my ground, even as my heart raced. "Adelaide, I never wanted to destroy anything. I just wanted to be part of this family." She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Family? You know nothing about family, about legacy, about sacrifice." Gregory stepped forward. "Adelaide, that's enough. You're making a scene." "A scene?" she shrieked. "Oh, I'll give you a scene." Before anyone could react, Adelaide hurled the wine bottle. It sailed past my head, missing me by inches, and shattered against the wall behind me. Red wine splattered across the pristine white paint like blood. Gasps and screams filled the air. Daniel pulled me close, shielding me with his body. But I gently pushed him aside. facing Adelaide head-on. "Why?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Why do you hate me so much?" For a moment, Adelaide's mask slipped. I saw pain, fear, and something that looked almost like regret flash across her face. But then the hatred returned, fiercer than ever. "Because you're everything I never got to be," she hissed. "Young, free, loved for who you are instead of what you represent. Do you have any idea what it's like to spend your entire life living up to someone else's expectations?" The room fell silent. Even the guests seemed to be holding their breath. Gregory's voice, when he spoke, was filled with a quiet fury I'd never heard before. "Adelaide, that's enough. You've gone too far this time." He turned to face the stunned crowd. "I apologize, everyone. It seems my wife is unwell. Please, enjoy the rest of your evening. The Finnegan family thanks you for your understanding." As security discreetly led Adelaide away, her sobs echoing through the hall, Gregory approached Daniel and me. "Ella," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I owe you an apology. I should have seen what was happening, should have put a stop to it long ago." I shook my head, feeling suddenly exhausted. "You couldn't have known." Gregory's eyes were sad. "Perhaps not, but I should have. Adelaide's behavior, it's been building for years. I just didn't want to see it." He straightened, his face set with resolve. "I want you both to know that I intend to separate from Adelaide. Her actions tonight and everything leading up to it are unforgivable." Daniel gasped, "Dad, are you sure?" Gregory nodded. "It's long overdue, son. And Ella," he turned to me, "I hope you can forgive us. Forgive me for everything you've endured." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "Of course, Gregory. But before I could finish, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Adelaide had broken free from security and was storming back into the hall, her face a mask of fury. "You think this is over?" she screamed. "You think you can just cast me aside like yesterday's trash? I made this family what it is." As she lunged towards us, time seemed to slow. I saw the glint of something metallic in her hand, a corkscrew, its point aimed directly at me. In that moment, everything hung in the balance. My life, my future with Daniel, the fate of the Finnegan family, it all came down to what happened in the next few seconds. As Adelaide closed in, I made a split-second decision. I wouldn't cower. I wouldn't run. Whatever came next, I would face it head-on, just as I had every other challenge since joining this family. I stood my ground, staring into Adelaide's eyes, silently daring her to do her worst. As Adelaide lunged at me, time seemed to slow. I saw the glint of the corkscrew, heard Daniel's shout of alarm, felt the collective gasp of the crowd, but I stood my ground, my eyes locked on Adelaide's. In that moment, something shifted. Adelaide's face crumpled, the fury giving way to anguish. The corkscrew clattered to the floor as she collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," she wailed. "I'm so sorry. I've ruined everything." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around at the stunned faces of the guests, at Gregory's mix of relief and sorrow, at Daniel's concern. Then, surprising even myself, I knelt beside Adelaide. "It's okay," I said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's over now." Security gently led Adelaide away, and as the commotion died down, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. Daniel wrapped his arms around me, and I leaned into his embrace. "It's really over," I whispered. 1 year later, I stood in the vineyard, cradling my swollen belly as I watched the sun set over the rows of grapevines. So much had changed since that fateful night. Adelaide had gone to a rehabilitation center, finally confronting the demons that had driven her for so long. Gregory had made good on his promise to separate, but he'd also shown compassion, ensuring Adelaide had the help she needed. As for me and Daniel, we'd thrown ourselves into the family business with renewed passion. My commoner's palate, as Adelaide had once sneered, turned out to be a blessing. The wine I'd selected for the gala, the one that had sparked so much drama, had become a runaway hit. Ella's Blend, as we'd named it, was now the flagship wine of the Finnegan estate. Its success had opened doors I never thought possible, allowing us to modernize the winery while respecting its rich history. "There you are." Daniel's voice pulled me from my reverie. He joined me, wrapping an arm around my waist. "How are my two favorite people doing?" I smiled, placing his hand on my belly. "We're perfect, just enjoying the view." "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he mused. "You know, I never truly appreciated all this until you came along." I leaned into him, feeling a surge of love and gratitude. It's more than I ever dreamed of. Just then, we heard a car approaching. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized the vehicle. "She's here," I whispered. Daniel squeezed my hand. "Are you sure about this?" I nodded. "It's time." We walked to the house, arriving just as Adelaide stepped out of the car. She looked different, softer somehow, the hard edges of bitterness worn away by time and introspection. "Ella, Daniel," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you for having me." I stepped forward, taking her hands in mine. "Welcome home, Adelaide." Her eyes filled with tears as she took in my pregnant form. "Oh, my dear, you look radiant." As we led her inside, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The journey had been hard, filled with pain and conflict, but it had led us here, to understanding, to forgiveness, to family. Later that evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Gregory and Rosemary joining us in a show of unity, I looked at the faces of my family. My hand found Daniel's under the table, and I felt our child kick, as if sensing the moment's significance. Adelaide raised her glass of sparkling cider. "To new beginnings," she said, her voice thick with emotion. As we echoed her toast, I realized that this messy, complicated, beautiful family was everything I'd ever wanted. We'd been through fire, but we'd emerged stronger, our bonds tempered by adversity. The future stretched out before us, as rich and complex as the finest wine, and I couldn't wait to savor every moment of it. As the conversation flowed around me, I caught Adelaide's eye. She gave me a small, genuine smile, one of gratitude, of acceptance, of hope, and I knew in that moment that everything we'd endured had been worth it. This was my family now, in all its imperfect glory, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I smoothed my wedding dress for the 100th time, unable to stop smiling as I gazed at my reflection. After years of disappointment, I'd finally found the one. Carter was everything I'd ever dreamed of, handsome, successful, and utterly devoted to me. In just a few hours, we'd be husband and wife. A knock at the door startled me from my reverie. "Come in," I called. My best friend Leanne poked her head in, her eyes wide. "Addison, you look stunning," she breathed. Then her expression shifted, growing serious. "Can we talk for a second?" My stomach clenched. "What's wrong?" Leanne hesitated, then blurted, "It's about Carter. I overheard something." Before she could continue, my father burst into the room. "There's my beautiful girl," he exclaimed, enveloping me in a bear hug. "Are you ready to knock 'em dead?" I used to smile, pushing aside the unease Leanne's words had stirred. "Ready as I'll ever be, Dad." The ceremony passed in a blur of flowers, music, and Carter's adoring gaze. As we shared our first dance as husband and wife, I felt like I was floating on air. Nothing could spoil this perfect day. Hours later, flushed and giddy from champagne, I scanned the reception for Carter. He'd mentioned needing to catch up with an old friend, but that had been ages ago. I spotted Leanne by the bar and made my way over. "Have you seen Carter?" I asked. Leanne's smile faltered. "Not for a while. Addison, about what I was trying to tell you earlier." "There you are." My new mother-in-law's shrill voice cut through the crowd. Eleanor appeared at my elbow, her perfectly coiffed hair not budging as she air-kissed my cheek. "Darling, you simply must come meet the Andersons. They're dying to congratulate you." I shot an apologetic look at Leanne as Eleanor steered me away. For the next hour, I was paraded around like a prized show pony, shaking hands and making small talk. All the while, a nagging worry gnawed at me. Where was Carter? Finally extricating myself from Eleanor's clutches, I retreated to a quiet corner and pulled out my phone. No messages from Carter. I dialed his number, but it went straight to voicemail. "Everything okay, Pumpkin?" My father's concerned voice made me jump. I plastered on a smile. "Of course, Dad. Just trying to track down my wayward husband." Dad's brow furrowed. "That's odd. I could have sworn I saw him leaving with that redhead. What's her name? His ex-girlfriend?" The bottom dropped out of my stomach. "Vanessa?" Dad nodded slowly. "That's the one. But I'm sure there's a perfectly innocent explanation." I barely heard him, my mind racing. Vanessa, Carter's old friend. The ex he'd sworn was ancient history. "Addison?" Leanne appeared at my side, her face etched with worry. "You won't believe what I found out. On the night of your wedding—" I held up a hand, silencing her. "Let me guess, it's about Carter and Vanessa?" Leanne's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "Lucky guess," I said bitterly. "Excuse me." I pushed past them both, ignoring their calls as I fled the reception hall. Outside, the cool night air did nothing to calm the storm of emotions raging inside me. Hurt, betrayal, and fury warred for dominance as I paced the empty parking lot. My phone buzzed. A text from Carter. "Sorry, got caught up. Be back soon." "Love you." I stared at the screen, tears blurring my vision. How could he do this? On our wedding day of all days. A car pulled into the lot, headlights sweeping across me. I squinted, recognizing Carter's sleek sports car. As it drew closer, I saw two figures inside, Carter behind the wheel and a familiar redhead in the passenger seat. My hands clenched into fists. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it was quickly becoming my worst nightmare. I stood frozen as Carter's car pulled into the parking lot. My wedding dress suddenly felt like a straitjacket, constricting my breathing. As Carter stepped out, his eyes widened in surprise. "Addison, what are you doing out here?" I ignored him, my gaze locked on Vanessa as she emerged from the passenger side. "Having fun catching up with your old friend?" I spat. Carter's face paled. "It's not what it looks like, I swear." "Really? Because it looks like you abandoned your wife on our wedding day to run off with your ex-girlfriend." Vanessa at least had the decency to look ashamed. "I'm so sorry, Addison. I didn't realize." "Save it," I snapped. Turning to Carter, I hissed, "How could you do this to me?" He reached for me, but I recoiled. "Baby, please, let me explain." "Explain what? How you lied to me? How you made a mockery of our vows?" Carter's expression hardened. "You're overreacting. Nothing happened." "Nothing happened," I laughed bitterly. "You disappeared for hours on our wedding night." "I told you, we were just talking." "In your car? For hours?" I shook my head in disbelief. "Do you think I'm stupid?" Carter's eyes flashed with anger. "Maybe if you weren't so damn insecure, I wouldn't need to seek companionship elsewhere." His words hit me like a slap. Before I could respond, Leanne appeared at my side. "Everything okay out here?" she asked, eyeing Carter suspiciously. "It's fine," Carter snapped. "This is between me and my wife." Leanne bristled. "Your wife who you abandoned at her own reception?" Carter rounded on her. "Stay out of this. You've always tried to come between us." "Don't you dare blame Leanne," I snarled. "She's been more loyal to me tonight than you have." Our raised voices had drawn attention. My father emerged from the reception hall, his face thunderous. "What the hell is going on here?" Carter's demeanor instantly changed. "Bruce, just a little misunderstanding. Everything's fine." Dad's eyes narrowed. "Doesn't look fine to me." He turned to me. "Addison, sweetheart, what happened?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I explain this humiliation? Carter jumped in. "It's nothing, really. Addison's just upset because I stepped out for a bit. But I'm back now and we can get back to celebrating." Dad's gaze shifted to Vanessa, who was trying to slink away unnoticed. "And who might you be?" Before she could answer, Eleanor's shrill voice cut through the night air. "There you all are. What on earth are you doing out here?" She bustled over, taking in the scene with narrowed eyes. "Carter, darling, your guests are wondering where you've gone. And Addison, really sulking in the parking lot? How unbecoming." I felt my cheeks burn with anger and shame. "I'm not sulking," I managed. "I'm trying to understand why my husband abandoned me on our wedding night." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Don't be so dramatic, dear. I'm sure Carter had a perfectly good reason." "Oh, he had a reason, all right," I muttered, glaring at Vanessa. Eleanor followed my gaze, her eyes widening slightly before her mask of civility slipped back into place. "Well, whatever's happened, I'm sure we can sort it out privately. No need to air our dirty laundry in public." "Dirty laundry?" Dad growled. "If that boy has hurt my daughter." "Now, Bruce," Eleanor cut in smoothly, "let's not jump to conclusions. I'm sure this is all just a big misunderstanding." I looked from Eleanor's forced smile to Carter's pleading eyes to my father's concerned face. The weight of expectations and appearances pressed down on me, threatening to suffocate me. In that moment, I made a decision. "You know what? You're right, Eleanor. This isn't the time or place." I straightened my spine and fixed Carter with an icy stare. "But don't think for a second this is over." With that, I turned on my heel and strode back towards the reception, leaving a stunned silence in my wake. As I pushed through the doors, Leanne hurrying after me, I realized with crystal clarity that my picture-perfect marriage was nothing but a beautiful lie. The weeks following our disastrous wedding night were a blur of tense silences and half-hearted apologies. Carter swore up and down that nothing had happened with Vanessa, but the seed of doubt had been firmly planted in my mind. One particularly gloomy afternoon, I found myself alone in our apartment, restlessly pacing. On impulse, I grabbed Carter's laptop. He'd always been protective of it, and a nagging voice in my head whispered that there might be a reason why. My hands shook as I opened it, surprised to find it unlocked. As I scrolled through his emails, my heart sank. There, in black and white, was proof of Carter's betrayal, not just with Vanessa, but with multiple women. The emails dated back months, even before our engagement. I was still staring at the screen, numb with shock, when the door opened. Carter walked in, his easy smile faltering as he took in my expression and the open laptop. "Addison, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice tight. I looked up at him, tears streaming down my face. "How could you?" Carter's face hardened. "You had no right to go through my personal emails." "Personal emails?" I scoffed. "You mean your collection of love letters to half the women in the city?" He strode over, slamming the laptop shut. "It's not what it looks like." "Really?" "Because it looks like you've been cheating on me since before we even got engaged." Carter ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "You don't understand. My job, sometimes I need to entertain clients. It doesn't mean anything." I stared at him in disbelief. "Entertain clients? Is that what you call sleeping with other women?" "Don't be so dramatic," he snapped. "This is why I didn't tell you. I knew you'd overreact." His dismissive tone ignited a fury in me. "Overreact? You've been lying to me our entire relationship." Before he could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from Eleanor. "Dinner at our house tonight, 7 p.m. sharp. We need to discuss your behavior at the wedding." I laughed bitterly. "Your mother wants to discuss my behavior. Isn't that rich?" Carter's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I showed him the text. "Apparently, I'm the one causing problems in this family." He sighed. "Look, let's just go to dinner and smooth things over. We can discuss this later." Part of me wanted to refuse, to scream and rage and throw his lies back in his face. But another part, the part that still clung to the hope of salvaging something from this wreckage, nodded in agreement. Hours later, we sat around Eleanor's immaculately set dining table. The tension was palpable as we picked at our food in silence. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "Addison, dear, I think we need to address your little outburst at the wedding." I gripped my fork tightly. "My outburst?" She nodded, her smile not reaching her eyes. "It was quite unseemly, causing a scene like that. In front of all our guests, no less." I glanced at Carter, but he studiously avoided my gaze. "I'm sorry if my reaction to finding my husband with another woman on our wedding night was inconvenient for you," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Eleanor's smile tightened. Now, I'm sure it was all just a misunderstanding. Carter has explained everything." "Has he?" I turned to Carter. "Did you explain about all the other women too, or just Vanessa?" The color drained from Carter's face. Eleanor's eyes darted between us. "What other women?" she asked sharply. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking. "Would you like to see the emails, Eleanor? I'd be happy to share." Carter lunged for my phone. "Addison, don't!" But it was too late. I'd already pulled up the damning messages, sliding the phone across the table to Eleanor. As she read, her carefully composed mask cracked, revealing a mix of shock and fury. She looked up at Carter, her voice ice cold. "Explain, now." As Carter stammered out excuses, I stood up, suddenly feeling suffocated. "I think I've lost my appetite," I said, heading for the door. Behind me, I heard Eleanor's voice rising in anger, Carter's pleading responses. But I didn't look back. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of something like hope. The truth was out, and there was no going back now. I paced my living room, my mind racing with possibilities. The truth about Carter's infidelity was out, but I knew that wasn't enough. He'd manipulated me for too long, and Eleanor would undoubtedly try to sweep everything under the rug to preserve their precious family image. No, I needed to do more. I needed to take control. My phone buzzed, a text from Leanne. "How are you holding up? Want me to come over?" I hesitated, then typed back, "Actually, can you meet me at Café Noir in an hour? I have an idea." An hour later, I sat across from Leanne, my hands wrapped around a steaming latte. "I'm going to expose Carter," I said without preamble. "Publicly." Leanne's eyes widened. "Addison, are you sure? That's a big step." I nodded firmly. I'm done being the victim in this story. It's time to write my own ending. We spent the next 2 hours plotting. Lean, bless her, threw herself into the plan with gusto. By the time we left the cafe, we had a strategy that made my heart race with equal parts excitement and terror. The next day I called my father. "Dad, I need your help," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Anything. Pumpkin, what's going on?" I took a deep breath. "I'm going to confront Carter and Eleanor, publicly, at the charity gala next week." There was a long pause. "Addison, are you sure that's wise?" "It's necessary, Dad. I can't let them keep controlling the narrative. Will you help me?" Another pause, then a sigh. "Of course I will. What do you need?" We talked for an hour, refining the plan. By the end, I felt a surge of gratitude for my father's unwavering support. The week leading up to the gala was a blur of preparations. Leanne and I worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and coordinating with trusted allies. My father used his connections to ensure key people would be present. The night of the gala arrived. I stood in front of my mirror, smoothing down my crimson dress. My hands shook slightly as I fastened my necklace. This was it. No turning back now. Carter was waiting by the door, looking handsome in his tuxedo. For a moment, my resolve wavered. How had we come to this? "Ready to go, darling?" he asked, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. The ballroom was a glittering sea of wealth and influence. Eleanor held court near the center, her laugh tinkling artificially as she greeted guests. I felt her eyes on me as Carter and I made our rounds, but I studiously avoided her gaze. An hour into the event, I caught Leanne's eye across the room. She gave me a subtle nod. It was time. I made my way to the small stage where the band was playing. With a deep breath, I stepped up to the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice ringing out clear and strong. "I hope you're all enjoying the gala. I have a special announcement to make." The room quieted, all eyes turning to me. I saw Carter's confused expression, Eleanor's narrowing eyes. "Many of you know me as Carter Williams's wife," I continued. "What you may not know is that our marriage has been built on a foundation of lies and betrayal." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Carter started towards the stage, but my father smoothly intercepted him. "I've recently discovered evidence of my husband's multiple affairs, dating back to before our wedding," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I believe in honesty and transparency, which is why I'm sharing this with you all tonight." Eleanor pushed through the crowd, her face a mask of fury. "Addison, stop this nonsense at once," she hissed. I ignored her, pressing on. I refused to be silenced or shamed for someone else's actions, and I refused to let this family's obsession with appearances overshadow the truth. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and pressed a button. Suddenly, the large screen behind me lit up, displaying a montage of Carter's incriminating emails and text messages. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. I saw Carter's face pale, Eleanor's eyes widen in horror. In that moment, standing before the truth laid bare, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Whatever happened next, I knew I had taken back control of my story. And I was just getting started. The room erupted into chaos as the evidence of Carter's infidelity flashed across the screen. I stood firm on the stage, my heart pounding but my resolve unshakable. Carter's face had turned ashen, his eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. Eleanor, however, was a force of nature. She stormed towards the stage, her carefully cultivated mask of civility crumbling. "How dare you?" she hissed, grabbing my arm. "You ungrateful little—" "Let go of me," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my limbs. "You don't get to control this narrative anymore, Eleanor." She released me as if burned, turning to address the murmuring crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, this is clearly a misunderstanding. My daughter-in-law is unwell. We'll sort this out privately." I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "Unwell? Is that what you call it when someone refuses to be manipulated and lied to?" Carter finally found his voice. "Addison, please, let's talk about this at home." "There's nothing left to talk about," I replied, my gaze sweeping the room. "I wanted you all to know the truth. About Carter, about this family, about the lies we've all been living with." Suddenly, a new voice cut through the tension. "I can vouch for what Addison is saying." I turned, shocked to see Vanessa pushing her way through the crowd. Carter's face, if possible, grew even paler. I was part of Carter's deception. Vanessa continued, her voice shaking. But I can't keep silent anymore. Everything Addison is saying is true. The room exploded into fresh chaos. I saw my father move to stand protectively near me, while Leanne hurried to my side. But my focus was on Carter and Eleanor, their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. Eleanor's eyes blazed with fury. "You little tramp," she spat at Vanessa. "How much did they pay you to say that?" Vanessa flinched but stood her ground. "Nothing. I'm here because it's the right thing to do." Carter finally seemed to snap out of his stupor. He strode towards me, his face a mask of desperation. "Addison, please, we can work this out. I'll do anything. Just don't do this." For a moment, I wavered. The look in his eyes, so familiar and once so dear to me, tugged at my heart. But then I remembered all the lies, all the betrayals. "It's too late, Carter," I said softly. "You had your chances. This is me taking control of my life back." Eleanor, seeing she was losing ground, changed tactics. Her voice took on a sickeningly sweet tone. "Addison, darling, think about what you're doing. This scandal could ruin us all. Is that what you want? To destroy this family?" I felt a surge of anger. "Family? You call this a family? A web of lies and manipulation, more concerned with appearances than actual love or support?" I turned to address the crowd again. "I'm done being silent. I'm done playing the perfect wife in this farce of a marriage, and I'm done letting fear control my actions." With shaking hands, I removed my wedding ring. The diamond glittered under the harsh lights as I held it up. This ring symbolized promises that were broken long ago. I'm returning it, along with all the lies and pain it represents. I placed the ring on the podium, the soft clink seeming to echo in the stunned silence of the room. "Addison," Carter pleaded one last time, "don't do this. I love you." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Carter, you love the idea of me, the perfect wife who would never question you, never challenge you. But that's not who I am anymore." With that, I stepped down from the stage, my head held high. As I walked through the parting crowd, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with legal battles and emotional turmoil, I was sure. But for the first time in months, I felt truly free. I had made my choice, and there was no going back. The days following the gala passed in a blur of legal meetings and emotional upheaval. I threw myself into my work at the boutique, grateful for the distraction. But even as I helped customers find the perfect outfit, my mind raced with thoughts of divorce papers and asset division. One particularly exhausting afternoon, I returned home to find Carter waiting on my doorstep. My heart clenched at the sight of him, a mix of anger and residual affection warring within me. "Addison," he said, his voice hoarse. "Please, can we talk?" I hesitated, then nodded curtly. 5 minutes. Inside, Carter paced the living room while I stood with my arms crossed, a physical barrier between us. "I've been in therapy," he blurted out. "I'm trying to change, to understand why I did what I did. I know I hurt you, but I love you. Can't we try to work this out?" For a moment I wavered. The man before me looked so different from the confident, manipulative Carter I'd come to know. But then I remembered all the lies, all the pain. "It's too late, Carter," I said softly. "I can't trust you anymore." His face crumpled. "What about everything we built together? Our dreams, our future?" "Those dreams died the moment you chose to betray me," I replied, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. Carter's demeanor suddenly shifted, his eyes hardening. "You'll regret this, Addison. You think you can just walk away? I'll make sure you have nothing when this is over." A chill ran down my spine at his threat, but I stood my ground. "Get out," I said, pointing to the door. After he left, I called Leanne in tears. She arrived within minutes, armed with ice cream and a fierce determination to protect me. "We need to be prepared," she said as we sat on my couch. "Carter's not going to make this easy." The next morning, I woke to a flurry of notifications on my phone. My heart sank as I scrolled through messages from friends and coworkers, all asking if I was okay. With trembling fingers, I opened my social media accounts. There, splashed across my feed, were private photos and messages taken out of context, painting me as unstable and vindictive. Carter had launched a smear campaign. I felt the walls closing in, my carefully rebuilt world threatening to crumble once more. But then I remembered the strength I'd found within myself. I wouldn't let Carter destroy me again. I called my father and Leanne, explaining the situation through tears of fury. Within hours, we had assembled a team of lawyers and PR specialists to counter Carter's attacks. Days blurred together as we fought back. For every lie Carter spread, we responded with truth. It was exhausting, but I refused to back down. The turning point came unexpectedly. I was at the boutique, trying to lose myself in work, when Vanessa walked in. "I'm so sorry," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "I can't stand by and watch Carter destroy you like this. I have proof, emails, texts, everything, showing he's behind the smear campaign. I'll testify if you need me to." I stared at her, shocked by this unexpected ally. "Why are you doing this?" Vanessa smiled sadly. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because I was once in your shoes. I wish someone had stood up for me then." Armed with Vanessa's evidence, we took the offensive. Carter's carefully constructed lies began to unravel, and public opinion swiftly turned in my favor. But just as victory seemed within reach, I received a call that made my blood run cold. It was my lawyer, his voice grave. "Addison, Carter's filed for full control of your assets. He's claiming you're mentally unstable and unfit to manage your finances. There's an emergency hearing scheduled for tomorrow." I felt the room spin around me. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, was suddenly at risk. Carter was making his final desperate play to regain control. As I hung up the phone, I realized this was it, the moment that would define everything. I could crumble under the pressure, or I could stand tall and fight with everything I had. Taking a deep breath, I made my choice. Carter had underestimated me for the last time. Tomorrow, I would show him, and the world, exactly what I was made of. The final battle was here, and I was ready. The morning of the emergency hearing arrived with a sense of foreboding. I stood before the mirror, smoothing down my most professional suit, trying to project an image of stability and competence. My hands shook slightly as I fastened my necklace, a gift from my father, a reminder of his unwavering support. Leanne arrived to drive me to the courthouse, her presence a comforting anchor. "You've got this, Addison," she said, squeezing my hand. "We're all behind you." The courthouse loomed before us, its stone facade imposing and cold. As we climbed the steps, I spotted Carter and Eleanor arriving, both impeccably dressed and wearing matching expressions of smug confidence. My stomach churned, but I lifted my chin and strode past them without a glance. Inside the courtroom, my lawyer Sarah greeted us with a tight smile. "Remember," she whispered, "stay calm, no matter what. We have the truth on our side." As the judge entered and the proceedings began, I felt as though I was watching from outside my body. Carter's lawyer painted a picture of me as unstable, vindictive, and incapable of managing my own affairs. With each word, I felt my carefully reconstructed world threatening to crumble. When it was our turn, Sarah presented the evidence of Carter's infidelity and manipulation. I took the stand, my voice surprisingly steady as I recounted the betrayals and lies. But as I spoke, I saw the judge's expression remain impassive, and a seed of doubt took root in my heart. During a recess, I overheard Eleanor speaking to Carter in hushed, urgent tones. "We need to end this now," she hissed. "Use the nuclear option." My blood ran cold. What else could they possibly have up their sleeves? As we reconvened, Carter's lawyer called a surprise witness, Dr. Evelyn Matthews, a respected psychiatrist. My heart sank as I recognized her. I'd seen her briefly for anxiety after discovering Carter's infidelity. Dr. Matthews took the stand, her face a mask of professional concern. "In my professional opinion," she stated, "Addison exhibits signs of borderline personality disorder, exacerbated by recent stress. Her erratic behavior and accusations stem from this condition, making her unsuitable to manage her own affairs at this time." The courtroom spun around me. How could she say this? We'd only had 2 sessions, and I'd never been diagnosed with any such condition. I turned to Sarah in panic, but her face was grim. As Dr. Matthews continued her damning testimony, I felt the walls closing in. Everything I'd fought for, every step forward I'd taken, seemed to be slipping away. Carter and Eleanor wore twin expressions of triumph, and I realized with sickening clarity that they'd planned this all along. In that moment, staring at the faces of those who sought to destroy me, something inside me snapped. A calm, cold fury washed over me, clearing away the panic and doubt. I leaned over to Sarah, whispering urgently. Her eyes widened, then narrowed in determination. She nodded, then stood to address the judge. "Your Honor, We request a brief recess to confer with our client." The judge agreed, and I was ushered into a small conference room. Sarah, Leanne, and my father crowded around me, their faces etched with concern. "Addison, what are you thinking?" Sarah asked. I took a deep breath, my mind racing with possibilities. "We need to turn the tables one last time," I said. "I have an idea, but it's risky. If it works, we expose Carter and Eleanor for who they really are. If it fails..." I trailed off, the implications hanging heavy in the air. My father placed a hand on my shoulder. "Whatever you decide, we're with you," he said firmly. Leanne nodded in agreement, all the way. I looked at each of them, feeling a surge of gratitude and determination. This was it, the final battle. Everything I'd been through, every lie uncovered and truth revealed, had led to this moment. "Okay," I said, my voice steady and resolved. "Here's what we're going to do." As we prepared to re-enter the courtroom, I felt a strange sense of calm. Win or lose, I would face this challenge on my own terms. Carter and Eleanor had underestimated me for the last time. The judge called the court back to order, and I straightened my spine, ready to fight for my future, my dignity, and my truth. As I stood in the courtroom, facing down Carter, Eleanor, and Dr. Matthews, a strange calm washed over me. I nodded to Sarah, who approached the bench. "Your Honor, we'd like to call a surprise witness of our own," she announced. Carter's lawyer jumped to his feet, objecting, but the judge, intrigued, allowed it. My heart pounded as the courtroom doors opened. Dr. Evelyn Matthews' identical twin sister, Dr. Meady Caroline Matthews, walked in. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. I watched as the color drained from Carter and Eleanor's faces. Caroline took the stand, her voice steady. "I'm here to expose a grave injustice. My sister, Evelyn, was coerced into providing false testimony about Addison's mental state. I have proof of the bribery and threats made by Carter Williams and his mother, Eleanor." She produced a series of emails and recorded conversations that laid bare Carter and Eleanor's desperation and manipulation. The judge's expression hardened as he reviewed the evidence. Carter leapt to his feet, shouting denials, but his protests rang hollow in the face of such damning proof. Eleanor sat frozen, her carefully crafted facade crumbling before my eyes. As the truth unfolded, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The judge called for order, his voice cutting through the chaos. "In light of this new evidence, I'm dismissing the petition for control of Mrs. Williams' assets. Furthermore, I'm recommending a full investigation into Mr. Williams and Mrs. Eleanor Williams for perjury and witness tampering." Relief flooded through me, but it was tempered by a bittersweet realization. This victory marked the end of a chapter in my life, a painful, transformative journey that had changed me forever. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by my supporters, I faced a sea of reporters. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward. "Today, justice was served," I began, my voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "But this isn't just about me. It's about standing up to manipulation and abuse, about reclaiming your power and your truth." As I spoke, I saw faces in the crowd, women nodding, some with tears in their eyes. I realized that my story resonated beyond just me. To anyone out there who's been made to doubt themselves, who's been gaslit or manipulated, your truth matters, your voice matters, and you are stronger than you know. In the days that followed, my life transformed. The boutique where I worked offered me a partnership, recognizing my resilience and business acumen. Leanne and I started a support group for women recovering from toxic relationships, turning our pain into purpose. One crisp autumn morning, I stood in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes yet to be unpacked. A gentle knock at the door revealed my father, holding a small gift-wrapped package. "I'm so proud of you, Pumpkin," he said, enveloping me in a warm hug. "Your mother would be too." I unwrapped the gift with trembling hands to find a delicate silver locket. Inside was a photo of my mother, her smile radiant and strong. "She always said you had her spirit," Dad said softly. "Now the whole world knows it too." Tears pricked my eyes as I fastened the locket around my neck. It felt like a talisman, a reminder of the strength that had always been within me. Later that evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, I reflected on the tumultuous journey that had brought me here. The pain, the betrayal, the moments of despair, they were all part of my story now. But they didn't define me. What defined me was how I'd risen above it all, how I'd found my voice, my strength, my truth. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant hues, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities I'd never dared to imagine before. I was Addison Williams, survivor, fighter, and now, finally, the author of my own story. And this was just the beginning. I slammed the front door shut, my hands trembling as I clutched the grocery bags. Another day, another argument with Ethan about money. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself before facing my family. "Mom, I need $50 for a new game," Cassius called from the living room, not bothering to look up from his phone. "Honey, we've talked about this. We need to cut back on expenses," I said, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. Lydia, my mother-in-law, glided into the room with a disapproving frown. "Clara, dear, don't be so stingy. The boy needs to have some fun." I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to snap at her. "Lydia, we're barely making ends meet. Ethan lost his job, and I'm the only one bringing in money right now." "Well, maybe if you worked a little harder," Lydia said, her voice dripping with condescension. Before I could respond, Ethan stumbled into the kitchen, reeking of cheap beer. "What's for dinner? I'm starving." "I just got home, Ethan. I haven't had time to start cooking yet," I said, trying to keep my voice level. He scowled. "What the hell have you been doing all day? Sitting on your ass?" "I've been working, Ethan. Someone has to pay the bills around here," I shot back, my patience wearing thin. Cassius wandered in, his eyes still glued to his phone. "So, about that $50? "No, Cassius," I said firmly. "We can't afford it right now." "But Grandma said I could have it," he whined. I turned to Lydia, my blood boiling. "Did you promise him money without talking to me first?" She shrugged, a sly smile on her face. "The boy deserves a treat now and then. You're always so uptight, Clara." "I'm uptight because I'm the only one in this house who seems to care about our financial situation," I exploded, my voice rising. Ethan slammed his fist on the counter. "Don't you dare raise your voice at my mother." I felt my chest tighten, my breath coming in short gasps. The room started to spin, and I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. "Mom?" Cassia's voice sounded far away. For once, he actually looked concerned. "I'm fine," I managed to say, even as black spots danced in my vision. "I just need a minute." Lydia sked. "Always so dramatic, Clara. Pull yourself together." I closed my eyes, willing the dizziness to pass. When I opened them again, I saw 3 faces staring at me with varying degrees of annoyance and indifference. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered, more to myself than to them. "What was that?" Ethan demanded. I straightened up, a sudden clarity washing over me. I said, "I can't do this anymore. I'm done being the only one who cares about this family's well-being." Lydia laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, please, what are you going to do? Leave? You've got nowhere to go, dear?" Her words hit me like a slap in the face, because I knew they were true. I had no family nearby, no close friends to turn to. I was trapped. "I'm going to lie down," I said, pushing past them and heading for the stairs. "What about dinner?" Ethan called after me. I paused at the foot of the stairs, turning to face them one last time. "Figure it out yourselves. I'm taking the night off." As I climbed the stairs, I could hear them bickering in the kitchen. Lydia's shrill voice, Ethan's angry retorts, and Cassius's whining all blended into a cacophony of misery. I collapsed onto the bed, my mind racing. How had my life come to this? When had I become a stranger in my own home, a mere ATM for my ungrateful family? As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, a plan began to form in my mind. I couldn't leave, not yet, but I could start preparing. I could start fighting back. Tomorrow, I decided, things would change. Tomorrow, I would start taking my life back, one small step at a time. Little did I know, tomorrow would bring a revelation that would shatter the very foundation of my world. I woke up early the next morning, my head pounding from the stress of yesterday's confrontations. The house was quiet, a rare moment of peace before the storm of family drama inevitably hit. I made my way downstairs, hoping to enjoy a cup of coffee alone. No such luck. Lydia was already in the kitchen, rifling through my purse. "What are you doing?" I demanded, snatching my bag away from her. Lydia smiled, all innocence. "Oh, Clara, dear, I was just looking for some change for the paper boy." "We don't have a paper boy, Lydia," I said, my voice tight with anger. "And even if we did, you have no right to go through my things." She waved her hand dismissively. "Don't be so dramatic. We're family, aren't we?" Before I could respond, Cassius trudged into the kitchen, his eyes glued to his phone as usual. "Mom, I need money for lunch today." I sighed. "Cassius, I gave you lunch money on Monday. What happened to it?" He shrugged, not looking up. "Spent it." "On what?" I pressed. "Stuff," he mumbled. Lydia chimed in. "Oh, let the boy have his fun, Clara. You're always so tight with money." I felt my blood pressure rising. "Lydia, I'm tight with money because we don't have any to spare. Ethan's unemployed, remember?" "Well, maybe if you worked a little harder," Lydia started, but I cut her off. "I work 60 hours a week," I shouted, my patience finally snapping. "I'm the only one bringing in any income, and you two are spending it like water." Cassius finally looked up from his phone, his face twisted in a sneer. "Grandma says you're just being selfish." I turned to Lydia, fury coursing through me. "Is that what you've been telling him?" Lydia's face was a mask of innocence. "I merely suggested that perhaps you could be a bit more generous with your family." "My family?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean the family that treats me like a walking ATM? The family that doesn't lift a finger to help around the house or contribute financially?" "Mom, chill out," Cassius said, rolling his eyes. "It's not our fault Dad lost his job." "No, but it is your fault that you're spending money we don't have on things you don't need," I snapped. Lydia placed a hand on Cassius's shoulder. "Don't listen to her, dear. Your mother's just stressed. Why don't you go get ready for school? I'll make sure you have lunch money." As Cassius left the room, I turned on Lydia. "Stop undermining me with my own son." "I'm merely trying to keep the peace," Lydia said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Someone has to, with you flying off the handle at every little thing." "Every little thing?" I was practically shaking with rage now. "You're encouraging my son to waste money we don't have, going behind my back to give him cash, and then painting me as the villain when I try to be responsible." Lydia's eyes narrowed. "Be careful. Clara, you wouldn't want Ethan to hear you speaking to his mother this way." "Hear what?" Ethan's voice came from the doorway. He stumbled into the kitchen, looking hungover and irritable. Lydia's demeanor instantly changed. "Oh, nothing, dear. Clara and I were just having a little chat about household expenses." I opened my mouth to protest, but Ethan cut me off. "Christ, Clara, are you harping on about money again? Give it a rest, will you?" I felt something snap inside me. "You know what? Fine. You want me to give it a rest? I will. I'm done. You three can figure out how to pay the bills and keep food on the table. I'm taking a personal day." I grabbed my purse and car keys, ignoring their protests as I stormed out of the house. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw Lydia in the window, a triumphant smirk on her face. Little did she know her victory was short-lived, because as I drove away, I wasn't just taking a day off. I was formulating a plan. A plan to take back control of my life, my finances, and my family. And Lydia? She had no idea what was coming. I returned home late that evening, exhausted but determined. The house was a mess, dishes piled high in the sink and takeout containers littering the coffee table. Ethan was sprawled on the couch, beer in hand, watching TV. "Where have you been?" he demanded, not bothering to look at me. "Out," I replied, curtly hanging up my coat. "Did you look for jobs today?" Ethan's face darkened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means exactly what I asked, Ethan. Did you look for jobs?" He stood up abruptly, towering over me. "You think I'm not trying? You think I enjoy being unemployed?" I stood my ground. "I think you're not trying hard enough. We can't keep living like this, Ethan. We're drowning in debt." "Oh, here we go again with the money talk," he sneered. "Is that all you care about?" "Someone has to care," I shot back. "You certainly don't seem to." Our shouting match was interrupted by Cassius stomping down the stairs. "Can you two shut up? I'm trying to study." I turned to him, surprised. "You're studying? That's great, honey. What subject?" Cassius rolled his eyes. "Why do you care? You're always too busy working to pay attention to me anyway." His words stung, but I tried to reach out. "Cassius, I know things have been tough lately. Maybe we could spend some time together this weekend? Just the two of us?" He laughed bitterly. "Yeah, right. Like you'd actually follow through. Don't bother, Mom. I don't need your pity time." As he stormed back upstairs, I felt my heart breaking. When had my sweet little boy turned into this angry stranger? Ethan chuckled humorlessly. "Nice try, Clara. You reap what you sow." I whirled on him. "What's that supposed to mean?" It means you've been so focused on work and money that you've neglected your own son, and now you're surprised he wants nothing to do with you? I felt like I'd been slapped. I've been working to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. Someone has to be responsible around here. Oh, so I'm irresponsible now? Ethan's voice rose dangerously. If the shoe fits, I shouted back. Suddenly, Lydia appeared at the top of the stairs. What's all this commotion? Ethan, dear, are you all right? Ethan's demeanor instantly changed. It's nothing, Mom. Clara's just being difficult again. Lydia descended the stairs, her face a mask of concern. Oh, Clara, dear, when will you learn? All this stress isn't good for anyone. Perhaps if you were a bit more supportive of Ethan during this difficult time. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Supportive? I'm the only one keeping this family afloat. And you two are spending money like water. Lydia's eyes narrowed. Now, Clara, let's not exaggerate. We're family. We support each other. Support? I laughed bitterly. Is that what you call undermining me at every turn? Spoiling Cassius behind my back? Ethan stepped between us. Don't you dare speak to my mother that way. I felt something snap inside me. Your mother? What about your wife, Ethan? What about the mother of your child? The room fell silent. Ethan and Lydia exchanged a look that sent chills down my spine. What? I demanded. What aren't you telling me? Lydia's face twisted into a cruel smile. Oh, Clara, you really don't know, do you? Ethan's face paled. Mom, don't. But Lydia was already speaking, her words like daggers to my heart. Ethan isn't Cassius's father, Clara, and you're not the first woman he's deceived. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I staggered back, gripping the wall for support. What? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Ethan's face was a mask of guilt and anger. Mom, how could you? But I was already moving, grabbing my purse and keys. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I had to get out. As I fled the house, I heard Lydia's voice, dripping with false concern. Oh dear, was it something I said? The door slammed behind me, leaving me alone in the night, my world shattered into a million pieces. I spent the night driving aimlessly, my mind reeling from Lydia's revelation. By dawn, I found myself parked outside our house, exhausted and numb. I steeled myself and walked inside, determined to confront Ethan and get the truth. The house was quiet as I entered. I found Ethan in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and weary. Clara, he began, but I cut him off. Is it true? I demanded. Is Cassius not your son? Ethan's silence was all the confirmation I needed. I felt my world crumbling around me. How could you? I whispered, my voice trembling with rage and hurt. All these years you let me believe. I'm sorry, Ethan interrupted, his voice hollow. I never meant for you to find out like this. Find out like this? I echoed incredulously. When exactly were you planning to tell me? On your deathbed? Before Ethan could respond, Lydia glided into the kitchen, a smug smile on her face. Oh, good, you're back. I was worried you might do something rash. I turned on her, fury coursing through my veins. You've known all along, haven't you? You've been holding this over my head for years. Lydia's smile didn't falter. Now, Clara, let's not be dramatic. Family secrets are a burden we all must bear. Family secrets? I laughed bitterly. Is that what you call lying to me for 16 years about the paternity of my child? Ethan stood up, his face a mask of guilt and anger. Mom, that's enough. This is between Clara and me. Lydia's eyes flashed dangerously. Oh, I don't think so, Ethan. You see, Clara, there's more to this story than you know. I braced myself, knowing whatever came next would shatter what was left of my world. Lydia continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You see, Ethan isn't just Cassius's stepfather. He's also not my late husband's son. The room seemed to spin. What are you saying? I'm saying, dear, that Ethan's father was a wealthy man I had an affair with, a man who provided for us handsomely, until he didn't. Ethan's face was ashen. Mom, stop, please. But Lydia was relentless. You want to know why we're always so concerned about money, Clara? It's because we're used to having it, and we're not about to let someone like you stand in our way of getting it back. I felt like I was drowning. So all of this, the constant demands for money, the manipulation, it was all about getting back to some lifestyle you lost? Lydia's mask finally slipped, revealing the cold, calculating woman beneath. We deserve that life, Clara, and you're going to help us get it back. Like hell I am, I spat, my shock giving way to rage. I'm done with the lies, the manipulation, all of it. I turned to leave, but Ethan grabbed my arm. Clara, wait, we can work this out. Think about Cassius. I yanked my arm away. Cassius, the son you've been lying to his entire life? The one you've turned against me with your mother's help? He needs you, Ethan pleaded. No, I said, my voice steel. What he needs is the truth, and that's exactly what he's going to get. As I stormed out of the kitchen, I heard Lydia's voice, cold and threatening. You'll regret this, Clara. We'll make sure of it. I paused at the foot of the stairs, my heart pounding. I knew what I had to do next would change everything, but I couldn't live with the lies anymore. Cassius, I called out. Come down here. There's something you need to know. As I heard footsteps above, I steeled myself for the hardest conversation of my life. But for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. The truth was out, and with it came the strength to fight back against the family that had manipulated me for far too long. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a battle that would test every ounce of my resolve. The days following my confrontation with Ethan and Lydia were a blur of tension and hostility. Cassius hadn't spoken to me since I revealed the truth about his parentage, and Ethan alternated between pleading for forgiveness and lashing out in anger. Lydia, meanwhile, watched it all with a cold, calculating gaze that sent chills down my spine. I threw myself into work, desperate for an escape from the toxic atmosphere at home. But the stress was taking its toll. Headaches plagued me constantly, and I found myself struggling to focus on even the simplest tasks. One morning, as I rushed to get ready for an important meeting, a wave of dizziness hit me. I gripped the bathroom counter, my vision blurring. Clara? Ethan's voice came from the hallway. Hurry up, will you? I need to use the bathroom. I tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. My left arm felt heavy, numb. Panic rose in my chest as I realized what was happening. I managed to croak before my legs gave out. I crumpled to the floor, my head slamming against the tile. The next thing I knew, I was in a hospital bed, the steady beep of monitors filling the air. A doctor stood at the foot of my bed, her face grave. Mrs. Thompson, you've suffered a minor stroke, she explained. You're lucky your husband found you when he did. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed. A stroke, at 40. How had my life come to this? When can I go home? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The doctor frowned. You'll need to stay for observation for at least a few days. And when you do go home, you'll need to take it easy. No work, no stress. Your recovery needs to be your top priority. I almost laughed. No stress? In my house? The doctor might as well have asked me to sprout wings and fly. Ethan entered the room then, Lydia close behind. For a moment, I saw genuine concern in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by his usual look of annoyance. So what's the verdict? He asked the doctor. When can she come home? We've got bills to pay, you know. I stared at him in disbelief. I'd just had a stroke, and all he could think about was money. The doctor explained the situation, emphasizing the need for rest and recovery. Ethan nodded impatiently, while Lydia's eyes narrowed. Well, Lydia said, her voice dripping with false concern, I suppose we'll just have to manage without you for a while, Clara, though I'm not sure how we'll make ends meet. I felt a surge of anger. I just had a stroke, Lydia. Is money really all you can think about? Lydia's mask slipped for a moment, revealing the cold, hard woman beneath. Life doesn't stop because you're ill, Clara. Bills still need to be paid, food still needs to be bought. Your responsibilities don't pause just because you're having personal issues. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Personal issues? Is that what you call a stroke? Ethan stepped in, his face a mixture of guilt and frustration. What Mom means is, we're worried about how we'll manage while you're recovering. You know we depend on your income. The weight of their expectations, their constant demands, pressed down on me like a physical force. I realized in that moment that nothing would change. They would drain me dry, squeeze every last ounce of life from me, and still demand more. Get out, I whispered. What? Ethan looked surprised. I said, get out. My voice rose, strength I didn't know I had surging through me. Both of you, leave. Now. As they left, shock evident on their faces, I made a decision. This was it. The last straw. When I left this hospital, I wouldn't be going back to that house. I wouldn't be going back to that life. I reached for my phone with shaking hands. It was time to call my sister. It was time to get out. The day I was discharged from the hospital, my sister Rachel was waiting for me. Ethan and Lydia hadn't bothered to show up, probably too busy figuring out how to access my bank accounts in my absence. "You ready to go?" Rachel asked, her eyes filled with concern. I nodded, feeling a mix of fear and determination, more than ready. As we drove to her place in LA, I filled Rachel in on everything that had happened. She listened in shocked silence, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. "Clara, I had no idea it was this bad," she said finally. "Why didn't you reach out sooner?" I sighed. I guess I was ashamed, and hopeful things would change. When we arrived at Rachel's apartment, my phone exploded with messages and missed calls from Ethan and Lydia. I turned it off, unable to deal with their drama. For the next few days, I focused on recovering and planning my next steps. Rachel introduced me to her friend Sarah, a sharp-witted divorce attorney who listened to my story with growing outrage. "Clara, what they've done to you is financial abuse," Sarah said firmly. "We need to act fast to protect your assets and your future." With Sarah's help, I began the process of untangling my finances from Ethan's. It was then that I discovered the true extent of their spending. Credit cards maxed out, savings depleted, even a second mortgage on the house I'd worked so hard to pay for. "They've been bleeding you dry," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. "But we're going to put a stop to it." A week after I'd left, Ethan finally tracked me down. He showed up at Rachel's apartment, pounding on the door. "Clara, I know you're in there," he shouted. "You can't just abandon your family like this." I opened the door, steeling myself. "I'm not abandoning anyone, Ethan. I'm saving myself." His face contorted with rage. "You selfish bitch. Do you have any idea what you've done? We can't pay the bills. Cassius needs new clothes for school and Mom's medication." "Stop," I interrupted, my voice surprisingly calm. "Your financial problems are not my responsibility anymore. I'm done being your personal ATM." "You can't do this to us," he snarled. "We're family." I laughed bitterly. "Family? Is that what you call lying to me for years, manipulating me, driving me to the brink of death with stress? No, Ethan, we're not family. We're done." I slammed the door in his face, my heart pounding. As his shouts faded, I turned to find Rachel and Sarah watching me with a mix of pride and concern. "You did good," Sarah said. "Now let's make it official." The next day, we filed for divorce. I also froze all joint accounts and removed Ethan and Lydia's access to my personal finances. It felt like cutting off a gangrenous limb, painful but necessary for survival. The backlash was immediate and vicious. Lydia launched a smear campaign, telling anyone who would listen that I was a neglectful mother who had abandoned her family. Cassius, manipulated by his grandmother, sent me hateful messages that broke my heart. But the worst blow came when I received a letter from Ethan's lawyer. They were contesting the divorce, claiming I was mentally unstable due to my stroke. They wanted full control of all our assets and were even pushing for alimony. I felt the world closing in around me. How could they do this? How could they twist my illness against me, try to strip me of everything I'd worked for? As I sat on Rachel's couch, the letter crumpled in my fist. I felt a familiar wave of dizziness wash over me. The stress was threatening to overwhelm me again, to drag me back into that dark place. But this time, I refused to let it win. This time, I would fight back. I looked up at Rachel and Sarah, my voice steady despite the tears in my eyes. "I want to counter-sue. For everything. It's time they learned they can't push me around anymore." Sarah nodded, a fierce gleam in her eye. "Let's do it. It's time to show them who they're really messing with." As we began to plan our strategy, I felt a surge of strength. The battle ahead would be tough, but for the first time in years, I was ready to fight for myself. And this time, I wouldn't back down. The courtroom felt suffocating as I sat beside Sarah, my hands trembling slightly. Across the aisle, Ethan and Lydia glared at me, their faces masks of righteous indignation. Cassius wasn't present, and my heart ached at his absence. "All rise," the bailiff called out, and the judge entered. As the proceedings began, Sarah presented our case with razor-sharp precision. She detailed the years of financial abuse, the manipulation, and the toll it had taken on my health. I felt exposed, my private pain laid bare for all to see, but I held my head high. Then it was Ethan's lawyer's turn. He painted a picture of me as an unstable, neglectful mother who had abandoned her family in their time of need. He even suggested that my stroke was a convenient excuse to shirk my responsibilities. "Your Honor," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. Mrs. Thompson's erratic behavior and sudden departure from the family home raised serious questions about her mental state. We believe it would be in everyone's best interest if Mr. Thompson were granted full control of their joint assets. I felt a surge of panic. Could they really do this? Could they strip me of everything I'd worked for? Sarah squeezed my hand reassuringly before standing. Your Honor, if I may? She proceeded to present evidence of Ethan and Lydia's reckless spending, the maxed-out credit cards, the second mortgage they'd taken out without my knowledge. She even had statements from my doctors confirming that the stress of my home situation had directly contributed to my stroke. As she spoke, I watched Ethan and Lydia's faces. Ethan looked increasingly uncomfortable, while Lydia's eyes darted around the room, as if seeking an escape route. Then came the bombshell. Your Honor, Sarah said, we have evidence that Mrs. Lydia Thompson has been siphoning money from Clara and Ethan's joint accounts into a private offshore account for years. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Lydia's face went pale, while Ethan turned to her in shock. Furthermore, Sarah continued, we have reason to believe that this money is connected to the inheritance from Ethan's biological father, the wealthy man Mrs. Lydia Thompson had an affair with years ago. I watched as Ethan's world crumbled around him. He stared at his mother, betrayal etched across his face. The judge called for order, his gavel echoing through the courtroom. In light of this new evidence, we'll take a brief recess. Court will reconvene in 1 hour. As we filed out of the courtroom, I felt a mix of vindication and exhaustion, but the battle wasn't over yet. In the hallway, Ethan approached me, his face a storm of emotions. Clara, I had no idea about the money, about my father, none of it. For a moment I felt a flicker of sympathy for him, but then I remembered all the years of neglect, of dismissal, of choosing his mother over me time and time again. It doesn't change anything, Ethan, I said quietly. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. As I turned away, I saw Cassius standing at the end of the hallway, his eyes wide with confusion and hurt. My heart clenched. Cassius, I called out, taking a step towards him. But before I could reach him, Lydia appeared, grabbing his arm and pulling him away. Don't listen to her lies, darling, I heard her hiss. She's trying to turn you against us. Cassius looked back at me, uncertainty in his eyes, before disappearing around the corner with Lydia. I felt my knees go weak, and Sarah quickly guided me to a nearby bench. It's not over, Clara, she said firmly. We're close, so close to ending this once and for all. As we sat there, waiting for the court to reconvene, I felt a strange mix of hope and despair. I was on the verge of reclaiming my life, my finances, my freedom, but at what cost? Had I lost my son forever? The bailiff's voice rang out, calling us back into the courtroom. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. With a deep breath, I stood up, squaring my shoulders. Whatever happened next, I was ready to face it. For the first time in years, I was fighting for myself. And I wasn't about to give up now. 5 years had passed since that fateful day in court. I'd won my freedom, my finances, and a new life, but the cost had been high. Cassius, manipulated by Lydia's lies, had chosen to stay with his father. The pain of that loss never truly faded. I was sipping coffee on the balcony of my LA apartment when my phone buzzed, an unknown number. I answered cautiously. Mom? The voice was deeper, but I'd know it anywhere. Cassius? My heart raced. Is everything okay? There was a long pause. Not really. Can we talk? In person? An hour later, I opened my door to find not just Cassius, but Ethan too. They looked defeated. Ethan's hair had gone gray, and Cassius, now 21, had a wariness in his eyes that broke my heart. Come in, I said, stepping aside. They sat on my couch, looking out of place in my new life. I perched on the edge of an armchair, waiting. Ethan spoke first. Clara, we need your help. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. What kind of help? Cassius looked up, his eyes pleading. We're broke, Mom. Grandma Lydia, she took everything. The house, the cars, even Dad's inheritance. She's gone, disappeared to some tropical island. We've got nothing left. I sat back stunned. How? Why? Ethan's face crumpled. After you left, things fell apart. I couldn't hold down a job. Lydia kept spending, saying her connections would save us. But it was all lies. She was just using us, like she always had. A part of me wanted to say, I told you so, but the broken looks on their faces stopped me. I'm sorry, I said instead. That must have been hard. Cassius leaned forward. Mom, I know we don't deserve it. I know I've been terrible to you. But we need help, just to get back on our feet. I looked at them, these two men who had once been my whole world, who had hurt me, neglected me, pushed me to the brink, and I felt nothing, no anger, no resentment, just a calm certainty. I can't, I said softly. Their faces fell. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. I can't give you money, I continued. That's not what you need. What you need is to learn to stand on your own feet, to take responsibility for your lives. I turned to Cassius. I can help you apply for college scholarships. I'll even co-sign a student loan if you need it, but you have to do the work. Then to Ethan. I know a program that helps older adults retrain for new careers. I'll give you the information, but you have to commit to it. They stared at me, a mix of disappointment and... Was that respect in their eyes? Why would you help us at all? Ethan asked. After everything we did? I smiled, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Because I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me, for the woman I've become, the woman who knows her worth and won't let anyone diminish it again. As they left, promises to consider my offers ringing hollow, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. I'd faced my past, stood my ground, and come out stronger. My phone buzzed again. A text from Rachel. Guess what? Lydia's been arrested in Bali for fraud. Karma's a bitch, huh? I laughed out loud, a free, joyous sound. The final piece had fallen into place. Justice, in its own twisted way, had been served. I walked back out to my balcony, looking out over the city I now called home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. A new day was ending, but for me, it felt like a beginning. I'd lost a family, yes, but I'd gained something far more precious, myself. And as I stood there, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, I knew with absolute certainty that I was going to be okay. More than okay, I was going to thrive.